Here we go. Back on stream. This is the Rhetoric Prof stream. My name is Tim. And today I'm not totally sure what we'll do. It's been a minute. I said I was going to do this regularly, but I keep thinking about it and then being like, oh, it's not quite right. But I had some reasons today, things I've been thinking about that make me think that it's worth doing it even if it's not totally okay, even if I haven't figured out how to use this thing yet for the kinds of stuff I'm really interested in. We'll see. Maybe you can help me figure out how to use it for the stuff that'll be interesting to you. But I've been thinking a lot about debate today, so I thought that maybe I talk a little bit about that. If anybody comes, maybe we can have a debate. Oh. I thought I updated this, but that should do it. Yeah, okay. So I've made the title of this stream, trying to be cheeky, Debate Me, Bro. And the Debate Me, Bro line has quite a history to it at this point online. People are like, this kind of provocation to come and debate, like, come at me. There's a whole ecology of people online who are using this provocation. Usually, I mean, it's most powerful when someone refuses to debate, because then you're like, see, they're scared. They won't even show up. But the quality of the debates that we have, oh yeah, what's up? A rose. You dumb ugly. Okay, so this is a good example of what, thank you so much. This is a good example of what people misunderstand about debate. And debate requires there's no debate I won. That's true. That's true. You won something. You won the consolation prize of this. But if you want to stick around, we can talk about what would a debate actually be? What would it look like? Because that's what I'm talking about or thinking about today. I don't know. Well, what do you want to talk about? Maybe we could talk about what you want to talk about. But I haven't even introduced myself to you because you got here a little late. But my name's Tim, and as you can see from the name of this stream, I am a professor of rhetoric. And I've been thinking about debate today because I think about it like pretty much every day. But I've been thinking about what it means to people when you say like, debate me, bro. It's this moment of provocation. It's this moment of kind of machismo, of being like, you have got nothing on me. And there's a part of that I think that might be helpful. But I think actually it's mostly bad. It mostly produces pretty bad discourse, pretty uninteresting stuff. Because we don't really have a popular theory of debate that's anything other than confrontation. It's just this moment of like, as you performed it, you dumb ugly. You dumb ugly is a great line of like what it sounds like most of the time when people debate. So if you have another thing that you want to talk about, we could use it. Or I'll also just kind of keep yammering on about what I think about debate. But if you have something else to say, I'm all ears. And you're all fingers. No, okay, that was it. That's all we got out of a rose was you dumb ugly. When I look at a rose, I often feel dumb and ugly because the rose, sin porque, florece porque florece. It blooms because it blooms. It has no reasons. Like many debates online, have no reasons, no arguments, not very good. And today I listened to a number of debates. Some were okay, some were not so good. Some moments of the debate were very good. And these were in my classes that I was teaching. And then I also had another class where I was like, okay, well, we can do this one thing or we can have a debate. And it was about 50-50, and then people started talking about debate, and they were like, oh, I did debate in high school. That was terrible. It was really awful. And then everyone switched, and they're like, never mind. We don't need to debate. So on one hand, there's like this huge surcharge of energy around what debate is. It's like, to be able to debate is you're still debating, you ugly. That's pretty good. You're very good at the pseudo debate of just like insulting people at random times. That's pretty good. I'm not really debating. I'm kind of talking about debate. I will debate you, though, if you want to debate. But we have to talk about what that means. So one of the things that a debate requires is a proposition. So, like, technically, we could debate the proposition that, like, I am ugly. You would take that, and I would defend myself against that. But I might agree with you. So we also need not just a proposition, but a proposition that creates generates an argument that has interest to a public, to an audience. And that wouldn't be a very good example of it, because who cares? I mean, if I am ugly or not, nobody really cares. But there might be other topics that we could talk about that would be of greater interest to others, because the debate's not just about the people that are involved in it. If it's just two people, you don't really need to go through the formalities of a debate. You can just have argument. A debate's purpose could have many purposes, but its purpose is to portray something before others, part of public discourse. My ugliness is not a topic of public controversy, so it doesn't make for a good debate. And it's also obvious. You can just look at me and see. So, what can I say? So it also has to be controversial. It has to be something that's where there are potentially arguments from a number of perspectives. And one of the things that the debate does is it kind of, hopefully, if things go well, lays out a compelling version of what that position means to somebody, and so that people can identify with it or not. But yeah, I was listening to lots of talk about debate today. And so I was thinking more about, rather than what debate should look like, what debate does look like to people, what people think about. And you're really helping me here. You're doing a good job of giving me a sense of what people imagine debate looks like. It's just this kind of insult exchange that people have. It's a moment of kind of proving your personal superiority over someone else, to show the power of your intellect, something like that. What's up? Scary. Sounds like you're deflecting from the topic of your appearance. I mean, if you want me to argue this, you lay it down. Let's go. I'm ready. You have the evidence right here. Make it happen. I'll do my best. It depends on which point of view you want to take. But political debate is one version of debate. I mean, what makes a debate political is a question. Is it a political debate just because politicians are having it? I think lots of times what most people think about, at least where I am in the United States, most people think about a debate, they think about the presidential debates. And better people than I can tell you about the history of that. But they're not really debates, are they? Because there's not a proposition. It's just a question. And they don't ask even the same questions to the different candidates. Oftentimes they'll ask one candidate one question, and they ask someone else another. It's like the idea of the debate is that what we disagree on is contained within the discourse of the proposition. And we kind of explore what that means. Whereas in a presidential debate, the idea of the difference between the candidates is assumed to be that they represent two different positions. And so those positions aren't articulated in the debate by a proposition. So it can just be like, but then we actually get a lot of times that they don't disagree. They just kind of insult each other, even though they often are putting forward very similar policies. And it gives us the impression that there's this huge disagreement, when really there's quite a lot of agreement. There's a lot of agreement in a good debate, too. There's an agreement about the fact that it's worth talking about, that we have some kind of common principles or values that we can appeal to, even though we have different interpretations of them. There's always an agreement when we have argument. And it's a question of that. Debates can be discussions, too. What do you mean by that? Debates can be discussions. I mean, I guess so. It depends on how, do we want to make a distinction between discussion and debate? We don't have to. We could say they're all kind of similar talky words. But I'd say that discussion is pretty different from debate. But I'm curious what you think about it, Sabotic. Welcome back to the stream, by the way. It's been a minute. I hope I didn't lose a rose because I wasn't powerful enough if I didn't disagree with him, with his proposition that I was ugly, so he might have gone away. No one wants to debate this topic. Maybe if I argued that I'm ugly, then this would be easier, but I'm willing to take the harder position. Two opposing people are talking about what they agree or disagree with. It is a discussion, but also debate. Yeah, I think that here. So the way that I think about it, I don't think that you're wrong. But the way that I think about it is, if we have a disagreement, like the way that a disagreement might come up in everyday life might be something like, oh, this movie's so good. And someone's like, oh, that movie's terrible. In a certain way, there is a proposition there that we could see that is working, where it's like, the movie is good. Someone defends that thesis and someone argues against it. But one of the things that you often hope for in a conversation or a discussion of a topic like that is that you come to agreement. That seems kind of normal and like a good human practice, to try to agree once in a while. And in a debate, that's kind of foreclosed as a possibility. We take on roles, and in those roles, we don't want to agree with our opponents. Well, why would we ever do that? That seems kind of perverse, that we would prevent agreement from happening. Like full agreement, that we come... sometimes it does happen in a debate. I've seen where someone's like, their arguments are pretty good, and they just sit down and, look, I agree, they can't find anything to say, but that's pretty bad when that happens. It's a little embarrassing and hopefully funny and humanizing, but in a debate, we kind of create those roles and we try to maintain that tension against the typical social pressures we have to agree. And so it's artificial in a certain way. It's kind of artificial maintenance of being like, well, how far can we go? What can we discover about the possibilities of the different interpretations of what these positions might be? If we weren't in a social situation in which either we had the pressure to continue to agree with someone because, it feels awkward to be like, oh, I don't like what you like even. Or, on the other hand, the social pressure to kind of like remain within your camp and not even listen to what other people have to say. So debate is a kind of artificial, formal tool that can be used. It's often not. It's often used poorly. Everyone's going to the bandsaw when they should really be going to the circular saw or whatever the analogy would be. It's a helpful tool to kind of to explore what it would mean to inhabit a position that would be valuable if those positions in the debate were, on the one hand, recognizable as real positions out in the world, but also articulated with a depth and a richness and maybe like a surprising kind of difference from what we would typically take as just the kind of stereotypical opinion. It's moving from our sense of positions in controversy as something that's vague, like left, right, red, blue, pro-science, anti-vax, these kind of simplistic understandings of where people stand, to an articulation of those positions. Once we start articulating our positions, all sorts of weird things can happen. They kind of grow, and we see that they have sometimes profound inconsistencies, and they become difficult to maintain, and that tells us something. Or sometimes they have like a lot more evidence than and reason to believe them, even the people that inhabit them have. So this is what I've been thinking about. Maybe it's not interesting. You're like, why are you thinking about this boring shite all day long? But maybe it's just my job makes me think about these things. But I've been thinking about it. What are you thinking about it? And do you want to debate me, bro? Bring it. Let's go. Or alternatively, we can watch a debate that you think of when you think of a debate. Send me a link in the chat, and I'll put it on. Hopefully it's not some horrible thing that you're sending me. But I'll put it on, and we'll talk it through, and I'll kind of analyze how I see it from that perspective of debate, and you can tell me what you think. So we can do that too. Or you can leave. Because from this looking at my ugly mug for however long you're going to stay. But yeah, I don't know. Also having a brew. Boom, boom, boom. No takers. I guess I got to find my own debate to watch, because I haven't seen enough today. I've only seen like 5 or 6. I'm a junkie for this stuff. Love debate. Love it. Most of it's bad, but that's true of anything. If you're like, I love poetry, which means I just love poems, any old poem. Most of them are terrible. Most of them are really bad. So usually if you love something, you dislike most of what's going on about it. That's my sense of it. Most of it's pretty bad. It's funny. I mean, maybe I should just show you what I get. I opened up an incognito browser. And I just went to YouTube and just typed in debate just to see what that would give me. Maybe I'll show you that. And you can tell me what you think this means about how the absolutely average sense of things. Yeah, I've never. I mean, those come up all the time. The Ben Shapiro ones. Those are the ones that I think people see the most often. Well, let's just take a look. Let me pop this in, and I'm going to bring it up on OBS in a second here. Let me actually not do it that way. Yeah, that's it. I don't have a good aspect ratio kind of theory about how to do this yet. Maybe somebody else knows. Think of Trent Horn. I don't know Trent Horn, so we can look at Trent Horn. So I'll just scroll through this real quick. You can tell me what you think, and then we can look at a Trent Horn video if you want to send me one. I'd be curious to see what... I have no... I mean, that could be anybody. That could be like Goatsy or something. I have no idea. But just take a look. This is what debate, like, none of my browser history, my weird interests are involved here. I don't think. It's the incognito. So there's this channel, Modern Day Debate. So let's look at what this is first. This is just, what you would expect it. Violence and religion. Does it have a proposition? Infrared versus James Hake. It's just like, was the moon landing faked? A question, right? So I don't really think that questions make great debates, but was the moon landing faked is like just a question of fact, and do you believe this kind of thing? Usually it's like people, famous people just talking at each other. Stefan Molyneux versus Destiny. Oh my God. Okay. Steven Pinker. This kind of stuff is what we get. Then we get, ESPN debate. This is probably the best one of the whole results, I would imagine. OBJ situation with the Browns sparks a heated debate between Bart and Scott and Damian Woody. How long is that? 7 minutes. I'm not going to look at that. Winsome Sears challenges Jory to debate after dangerous claim. Let's listen to this one, actually. And then we'll look at Trent Horn. What does it look like when someone challenges you to debate? A lot of this is what it looks like. So yeah, the mayoral debates, because there's just elections. Socialism versus capitalism. It's this kind of like just absolute. Okay. I'll reserve my judgment. Let's listen to this.
Okay, one tip we wanted to pass along.
Oh, I also don't have my odd blocker on because it's incognito. Sorry.
In the Marine Corps, I was still a Jamaican, but this country had done so much for me. I was willing.
Yeah, Bill Nye versus Ken Ham, I'm aware of, but.
USA.
Where does she challenge?
Republican Winsome Sears delivering an emotional, inspirational speech as voters in Virginia elected her to become the lieutenant governor of their state. Let's bring in Virginia's lieutenant governor-elect, Winsome Sears. Very good to have you with us. Congratulations to you. So she's making like a media hit after her last night. It was wonderful to see you up there with your beautiful family accepting the lieutenant governor win. Tell me how you felt this morning when you woke up.
Okay,
tired.
This is the thing. It's just who
literally
cares?
Because
I'm gonna look at the thing and see where the debate comes up.
To advance, I would tool because of the things that have happened to us historically. To advance, I would think they're nefarious purposes. And so, if we stop just looking at race and just looking at people, because you see, I'm destroying all the narratives about race. Look at me. Look at me. I am a heartbeat away from the governorship in case anything happens to the governor.
I didn't know where that sentence was going. I'm a heartbeat away from. That could have been anything.
Governor. And how are you going to tell me then I'm a victim? And I didn't do anything special to get here.
Yeah, kicking people off the air is like, that's the moment when the debate becomes most real.
I took advantage of the opportunities. They're available here in America.
Yeah.
I wasn't born here. This is not my culture, not my country, but it allowed me, America allowed me to come and do for myself and
so
for my
I support
family. And I remember when
lots
I was
of
wanting to go to
immigration
college,
reform, many more
I
visas.
had 3 children under 5. My husband took a lower paying job so he could stay home because he already had his degree.
Her stump speech
and I put one of my children on the back of a bicycle so that I could get to college. So no one can say to me, I don't know what it is to be poor. You're looking at the American dream. So we can do better. And it's not 1963 when my father came at the height of the civil rights movement, 17 days before Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. We're better than that. We're always going to have problems. I understand that. I'm not saying we're perfect, but you can see those people at the border right now trying to get in. They're dying to get in because they know if they can put a foot on American soil, the trajectory of their lives will change just as
it probably will. It probably will. So, I mean, in some sense, I think that there's like, she hasn't yet gotten to the part where she's going to ask Joy-Ann Reid to debate her. But this is a common thing. Like in my class, we watch this famous debate of James Baldwin versus William Buckley about the American dream. And she's like, the American dream is like so, I mean, it's such a strange preoccupation of Americans, but what is it? It's this idea about like what's possible through individual effort. What's possible through individual effort. And so her argument is, look at me. I'm an immigrant. I'm black. I was able to do it. No problems. The American dream. I am the American dream. I mean, it's kind of interesting that she's saying that as a politician. That she is the American dream because she just got elected. It's like, well, I'm kind of, what were you appealing to when you were saying these things? But also, like, is the possibility of a single person achieving success through, well, sure, let's say that she through her efforts, why not? Is that what the American dream is? And that would be a more interesting debate to have. Like, how is the American dream for everyone, or is it for some? Do people fail to achieve the dream because they don't put in enough effort? Something like that. And then we would have to have a different kind of debate, I think.
But come on, father.
Debate me.
You know, here's what Joy Reid said last night, and I want to just get a quick
Here we
response
go.
from you, if I can, over on MSNBC about the Youngkin win and your win. Watch this.
You have to be willing to vocalize that these Republicans are dangerous, that this isn't a party that's just another political party that disagrees with us on tax policy, that at this point, they're dangerous. They're dangerous to our national security because stoking that kind of soft white nationalism eventually leads to the hardcore stuff.
Your reaction to that?
I mean, it's kind of a funny thing to say, like, there's the softcore and hardcore white nationalism. Okay, well, let's hear what she says.
Ms. Sears.
I wish Joy Reid would invite me on her show. Let's see if she's woman enough to do that. I'd go in a heartbeat and we have a real discussion without Joy speaking about me behind my back, if you will. She talks about white supremacy. Does she know that I ran against a white supremacist? I mean, Joy, come on, get your facts straight and then come talk to me. I'm waiting for you.
We hope she'll take you up on it. You have a lot to say, and a lot of people.
Yeah, but see, okay, this is like a perfect but perfectly weird encapsulation of the debate me, bro. She's like, debate me, Joy-Ann Reid. We can come on. We'll have a nice conversation. But it's this kind of dual thing of debate's supposed to represent the kind of cool-headed reasonableness, but it's also the kind of moment of like symbolic violence, like we are going to throw down. How could debate be both of those things? How has it come to mean both of those things? I think there's a long history of that. But that's kind of the state of a popular understanding of what debate is. It's a moment where you perform like the most possible symbolic violence you can on another person through the idea of being the most reasonable, the most cool-headed person. It's a strange kind of paradox. I don't know what you heard in this video, but it wasn't really worth watching at all. But I'm trying to squeeze some juice from the lemon here, because they're all lemons. There's just lots of lemons. But let's watch the Trent Horn debate. How would I get there? Just put Trent Horn debate in? God's existence. Okay, here we go. Which one should I watch? Or which one should we watch? I mean, these are all pretty long, but we can do it if you want. Scary. What do you think? What would be a good one? I wonder if I should. He's an apologist. Aren't we all? He's like a Christian apologist. Yeah. Apologetics is an interesting field to think about argument from. Whichever one seems interesting. Yes. Yeah, I mean, if you want to see a new one, then I can just choose this first one, God's existence. But if there's one that you think you have something to say about, we can watch that. I wonder if I can find anyone. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure that there's like a way to do this that's not dumb. I'm just kind of dumb about this where I keep moving it around, but I don't want it to be too hard to see. Okay, let's take a look at this one. I'm going to copy that. It's not on the right browser. Let me go put it in the one I have up. Yeah.
Let's go help people customize.
Oh, now we get a nice Liberty Mutual ad.
Okay, who sat at my desk?
Sure. It's good if it's not someone that you hate. I mean, I like, I might not like, I don't know if I'll like him, but it'll be good to watch together. This one's against a former Christian pastor turned atheist. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, this could be potentially interesting. I'm looking forward to it.
Tonight's debate will start with opening statements and 2 rounds of rebuttals.
And so we will begin.
No, it's not my. I mean, it's your stream as much as it's mine. That's kind of the whole theory of the stream. It's like,
joining me tonight, especially
let's open it up. I don't know what the theory is. I'm still working on it, but
a very important
it'd probably be better if it was your
Does
stream.
the Christian God exist? I will show the answer to that question is yes, and I'm sure Dan will try to show the answer is no.
So one of the things that's interesting already is he talks about showing the answer. I'll show the answer is yes. I'll show the answer is no. I wonder who the audience is for the debate. Oh yeah, maybe Scary, you can kind of tell us a little bit about the audience. It looks like it's at a kind of Catholic college, maybe. That would be my guess. It says Catholic.com down here at the bottom. But the fact that he's talking about showing, it imagines a kind of form of demonstration, a form of kind of syllogistic argument that follows from deduction. The acceptance of principles leads to another one, and that doesn't give me high hopes for the kind of persuasive quality. It could just be a slip of the tongue, but even little things like that, it's worth paying attention to how people describe what they see as what they're doing when they're making arguments. Yeah. Okay, let's check it out.
But before I present my evidence, let me point out that we are not discussing a scientific question. Science provides natural explanations for observable phenomena in the universe. Science can never answer philosophical questions about the existence of immaterial things like moral truths, minds, abstract objects, free will, or God.
So it's interesting there that he's trying to make the distinction between science and other kinds of discourses. And he draws that line around things that are immaterial, and he even includes abstract objects. From my point of view, science doesn't talk about anything but abstract objects. I mean, the conceptuality of science is almost always about abstract objects, vectors, forces. These are abstract. So that suggests to me the kind of engagement they'll have with science will be this kind of question that's mostly focused on a way of trying to think about phenomena or try to think about realities that are immaterial. But I wonder whether it's makes sense to cut science out of everything that's immaterial. It might be interesting to think about the different kinds of possibilities that are open for someone who wants to kind of defend a view of the world that's not limited to what is only scientific. Is the materiality versus immateriality the right line to draw?
Philosophers are divided, sometimes evenly, about these issues. So we can't point to a consensus like we do in science. Instead, we have to look at the arguments for ourselves and make up our own minds. So let's look at 3 arguments for the existence of God, keeping in mind that if the premises are true, and the reasoning is sound, then the argument's conclusion follows.
This is demonstration, right?
Certainty.
This is the imagination of persuasion is
First
demonstration.
Cause. In his book Godless, Dan says God could never finish the infinite series of thoughts in his mind before saying, "Let there be light." What Dan fails to appreciate, however, is that God's mind isn't fragmented into an infinite series of mental events.
So there's probably maybe because of like who Dan Barker and Trent Horn are, they're kind of like almost beginning a debate that's already happening. He doesn't spend a lot of time giving us a huge amount of context, and maybe Scary, you know a little bit more about it, but I'll do my best from what I understand. Let there be light is in the first Genesis story, when in God's creation. Fiat lux, in the Latin, this famous kind of moment of fiat is like, oh, okay. God's going to create light through his speech. And so there must be some argument in Dan Barker's book, like that some kind of information theory idea or something of like, well, you can't cross an infinity of ideas before you say anything. I'm guessing that's what it is. But it does seem strange to me that he wouldn't like just give us a simple rehash of the argument before kind of trying to take it down.
God is an infinite, undivided act of being who knows everything in one timeless act of existence. But Dan is right that if God had to traverse an infinite number of thoughts, he could never get anything done. Similarly, if time had to traverse an infinite number of events before today, then today would never happen. But today did happen. Therefore, the past is finite and had a beginning. And if the universe had a beginning, then it had a cause to explain why it began to exist.
It's a strange argument to concede because, this argument about you can't cross an infinity, it's one of the famous Eleatic paradoxes. And we're about like Achilles and the tortoise. Like, okay, Achilles gives the tortoise a head start, but Achilles, in order to catch up with the tortoise, has to cross half the distance, and then half of that distance, and half of that distance. And it's an infinite regress. And because it's infinite, even if it's infinitesimal, he'll never be able to do it. This is one of the early paradoxes. But like, have you heard of calculus? Not to oversimplify it, but we don't really have too many problems with crossing infinities. It kind of, or Gödel's sizes of infinities. Sorry, Cantor, not Gödel. Cantor's various sizes of infinity. It seems like a strange, like if you're the one kind of mathematical concept that you're going to talk about in your theological debate is infinity, it seems weird to concede that like God couldn't deal with infinity. It's like, come on. But anyway.
Most atheists believe that if prayer healed an amputated limb, that would be a miracle. But if the universe came into existence from nothing, wouldn't that also be a miracle? If the universe includes all space and time, then the cause of the universe must exist beyond space and time and be uncaused, or the argument starts all over again. It must be all-powerful because it made something from nothing. And it must be personal because this timeless cause chose to create a finite, temporal universe, and the only kinds of immaterial entities that exist are minds and abstract objects, the latter of which can't cause anything. Therefore, the cause of the universe's beginning must be an immaterial, eternal, all-powerful agent, or what most people call God. But now let me share two arguments which show God exists even if the universe has always existed. The argument from motion. Things change. That's obvious. And change is just the reduction of a potential to an actual. For example, a train car can potentially go down a track, but that potential to move can only be actualized by something else, pulling the car down the track.
Unless you want me to skip.
And whatever is pulling the car has to be pulled by something else, because nothing can actualize its own potential, any more than it could create itself from nothing.
So this is like, extremely... So it's Aristotelian through Thomas Aquinas. This is like pretty niche stuff, I have to say, in terms of like the appeal of this debate seems to me to be like people who are pretty deeply involved in theology, which makes sense. So I would say that this idea of like actuality versus potentiality, I think is an interesting one. But the idea that something could only... Let's go back and just really quickly hear what he said about that.
Down the track. And whatever is pulling the car has to be pulled by something else, because nothing can actualize its own potential.
Is that true? Nothing can actualize its own potential? Like, even from the Aristotelian point of view, I don't think that's right. This is one of the things that is true of the soul. Like the soul is a potential, is full of potentialities, which actualizes itself. I have the potential to read or to speak. When I'm not speaking, it doesn't mean that I can't. It just means that I'm not. And so that when I actualize it by speaking, what's actualizing it? Me, who has the potential to speak. So again, I mean, that seems like a strange interpretation. Maybe I'm missing something.
Any more than it could create itself from nothing. But maybe the universe's motion and change have existed forever. That would be like saying a train car is moving because an infinite number of cars is pulling it, or that a paintbrush could paint by itself as long as it had an infinitely long handle. An infinite series of movers doesn't explain why there's any motion at all, be it in a train or a universe. The train only moves because of something that gives motion but doesn't receive it, like a locomotive. Likewise, our universe only has motion and change because of something that actualizes the potential in all objects, but has no potential of its own, and is just pure actuality. So what is this first mover or changer like? Well, if it has no potential, then it can't potentially go out of existence, or potentially increase in ability. So it must be infinite and necessary. It can't be material or temporal, because that would entail the potential to move and change. So,
wow, I mean, he's just kind of like running through a bunch of kinds of claims, and I don't really feel like he's spending a lot of time substantiating them, because I think he assumes that the audience is just going to accept all of these claims because it's the model of demonstration. But one question I have, I don't know, maybe I'm being dense, but infinite in what respect? So the concept of the infinite, even in theology, doesn't mean just one thing. When Spinoza talks about the infinite, he doesn't mean a kind of extending quantity forever. So, it just means that it doesn't have a limit, but a limit with respect to what? To what property, to what quality? Even if we're going to go back into this kind of Aristotelian language, that things can be infinite in one respect and finite in another. And this is also true in mathematics. There are plenty of things that have certain properties that are infinite and certain properties that are finite. So I think it's worth kind of like, if all of this is predicated on a concept of the infinite and like what infinity means in terms of existence, something's existence, we should spend more time kind of establishing what we think.
It must be immaterial and timeless. It must be all-powerful because there is no potential act it can't perform. It must be all-knowing because it provides actual existence to potential properties and relations between objects, which are the basic elements of knowledge. Finally, this cause has to be all good, because evil is just a lack of good, and the ultimate cause has no potentials or deficiencies. An infinite, necessary, immaterial, timeless, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good being is what people mean by the word God.
Not what everybody means.
The argument from existence. Why is there something rather than nothing? There are only three...
So, wow, okay, that was a whole argument. I don't know. I mean, I think this demonstration model really... I don't know how people feel about it when they're listening to it. But demonstration as a model of persuasion seems to me just, like, very weird. And this kind of shows why I feel that that's weird. Because he's like... He got to his final conclusion. He's like, proven. Moving on. And there's so many questions in my mind. And he might not see those questions as valid. He might see that I just didn't follow his demonstration. But that's kind of what a debate would be for, right? Would be to speak to the questions that arise in the minds of an audience and not to just kind of formally have something that you feel in terms of the particular discourse that you're involved in is valid, like formally valid or formally kind of follows. Because all of these terms are semantic. They have meaning to them. And those meanings are involved in a world that has history and that has complexity. I feel like he's just not really understanding the responsibilities that go along with persuasion. He's kind of in the model of demonstration.
Explanations for why the universe exists at all. It exists for no reason. The universe is necessary, or it has to exist. Or 3, the universe is explained by something that is not the universe. Number 1 doesn't work because if things could exist for no reason, then we would expect to see objects like cats or Chryslers popping into existence all the time for no reason. Science also functions on the principle that unexplained phenomena have an explanation, even if we don't know what it is yet. Number 2 doesn't work because the universe is not necessary. You might ask why a triangle is lime green, but you wouldn't ask why it's three-sided. A triangle just has to be three-sided. But the question, why does the universe exist, isn't like asking, why is a triangle three-sided? The answer isn't obvious because the universe doesn't have to exist. It just does exist, and that requires an explanation.
I mean, I think it's an open question whether the universe has to exist. It's an open question in a number of discourses, including philosophy. And Ibn Sina or Avicenna was, I think, there are different points of view on, like, does the universe have to exist? Is it a necessary thing? It doesn't seem to me like it's so obvious as he thinks it is.
But the explanation of the...
I think what he might be thinking about here as necessity is, like, the geometry of the triangle. So he might be kind of conflating analytic statements, the way that philosophers think about analytic statements. Like, a triangle has 3 sides is necessarily true because it's analytic. Basically, it's a tautology. A triangle simply is something that has a shape that has 3 sides. But that's not the only version of necessity. There might be kind of causal necessity, right? Which might produce all sorts of things that are apparently contingent, but if you have a kind of broad enough scope of understanding of the causal mechanisms involved, you would see it would be necessary. So I don't think that it's so obvious.
The universe can't be dependent on other things to exist, like, say, another universe, because it too would need to be explained. An infinite number of universes doesn't explain why all these universes exist any more than an infinitely long chain unattached to a ceiling explains what is holding a chandelier over our heads. Instead, there must be a necessary being. And since I've shown a being of pure actuality is necessary because it has no potentials of any kind, and thus it has to exist, this provides another reason to believe that a cause with divine attributes, or God, exists. But how...
Okay, I think I'm starting to understand his argument better because it's the traditional argument of God is the necessary being, which is Avicenna's argument, Ibn Sina's argument. Yeah, but even his way of thinking about that, like, it's a being of pure actuality. Is that what does he mean by that? What does he mean? A being that has no potentiality. I think that in certain theologies, even certain Christian theologies, this would be heretical, dare I say, because God must be free. And what is freedom but not kind of pure actuality as necessity, but as potentiality, that even God has freedom. So within the theological debate that's happening here, I wonder if in this existence proof, the way that he's trying to prove it, you get an image of God that's... Is it the Christian God that's being proven here? Or is it even an idea of God? Or is it just a kind of formal understanding of a certain kind of propositional outcome of a particular metaphysics, which is a lot less exciting?
How do we know this God is the Christian God? What if this cause is the God of another religion?
Yeah, necessary being.
The gods of ancient mythologies are limited in existence, goodness,
necessary
power,
being possibly
and knowledge. So they can't be the true God. The true God could only be the God of classical monotheism, like Islam, Judaism, or Christianity. But if Jesus rose from the dead, then this shows the God of Christianity exists, because other religions deny Jesus rose from the dead.
Maybe to answer what I think you might be asking there, Scary, which is, like, is he arguing that there's a necessary being? I think he is, yeah, exactly. But I think he's trying to say that, well, there has to be a being. For there to be a necessary being, it has to be a being of pure actuality that has no potentiality. And that would be the thing I would say, even if I were to accept all of this kind of massive framework of metaphysics and theology that he's kind of putting forward as just the base premise of what you need to understand his argument, much less to accept it, I still don't know if I would accept that. Because I think it's possible to imagine something that exists out of necessity, that even in its essence is necessity or is necessary and can still have potentiality within it. I don't think that's necessarily a contradiction. But yeah.
Antony Flew, who was at one time one of the most famous atheists in the 20th century, said the evidence for the resurrection is better than for claimed miracles in any other religion. It's outstandingly different in quality and quantity. Even radical skeptics do not deny that Paul knew the apostles and described in 1 Corinthians 15 how both individuals and groups of people, as well as skeptics like himself, saw Jesus after his death. In addition, these first Christians believed Jesus rose from the dead in a Jewish society that believed dead messiahs were failed impostors, who, along with everyone else, would not rise until the end of the world. The best explanation for why Jesus' disciples preached Jesus' bodily resurrection in defiance of these cultural norms was because it really happened. But perhaps the apostles merely had a grief-induced hallucination. That's what Dan suggests in his writings.
I mean, it's an interesting argument to say, okay, this belief that is propagated by an early community of believers violates the cultural norm of their time. But I think that this makes like a pretty common, I don't want to call it a fallacy. I don't love the idea of fallacies, to be honest with you. But a pretty common kind of looseness in reasoning. The way, and this is not at all something that's unique to people making apologetical arguments about religion. It happens in every sphere that where you can encounter it in many spheres. Just the argument about a culture being this kind of like monolithic thing. The culture of Judaism in first century Palestine, it was pretty diverse. Lots of things were happening. And this has to, I mean, there are Hellenized Jews, right? Like Philo of Alexandria, who is one of an important source about early Judaism, or Josephus. Like there are many different kinds of cultural elements and cultural things that are happening within Judaism as a religion, as well as within Jewish practice, including those which are reported in the Christian Gospels between who we now know as the Pharisees and the so-called Sadducees, and the Essenes, right? These people out in the desert. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls who are doing these other kinds of practices. There's so much diversity in Jewish culture at that time and today, but at that time to say that, okay, well, because there's a cultural norm, anyone who violated it must have some kind of huge amount of evidence. That seems to me just like flies in the face of the complexity of culture and cultural expression. In fact, sometimes what becomes powerful is saying the very thing that goes against a cultural norm, quite like Christ himself does, right? When he's like, Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. That's something that kind of is a huge violation for many Jews even today, to kind of violate the Sabbath. Yeah, that's a pretty serious thing. You violate the Sabbath in order to save someone's life, or there are situations in which, even within Jewish law, it is necessary to do that. But that kind of statement was shocking. But that might be appealing to people. They might be like, yeah, I never totally liked that. You know what I mean? It's not totally obvious to me that just because something violates a cultural norm, everyone would be equally kind of repulsed by it. And we see that in our own culture today, that there are plenty of cultural norms, but they're mostly contested. That norms don't kind of produce behavior. They kind of describe behavior under a certain value system. And some behavior falls within it and some doesn't. Usually what a norm speaks to is that there's controversy, or there's kinds of contingency. If something was absolutely observed everywhere by everyone within a certain culture, it probably wouldn't appear as a norm at all. People wouldn't articulate it because it would just be like obvious. It's only at the moment that a norm gets confronted by some other kind of practice that it has to be articulated.
But there are 4 reasons that count against this hypothesis. 1, groups of people saw Jesus and groups of people don't have the exact same hallucination. 2, Paul was a persecutor of the church, so he would not have had any grief over the death of Jesus from which to hallucinate. 3, Jesus was buried in Jerusalem. The apostles could check his tomb to see if he really was dead, and the authorities could trot out his corpse in order to quash this new religious movement. 4, the apostles did check, and the tomb was empty. The Gospel's descriptions of women discovering the empty tomb is a detail that is so embarrassing in a patriarchal society that its inclusion in the narrative only makes sense if that is just what really happened. Finally, Dan may argue that the Christian God does not exist because of passages in the Bible that seem to show God is immoral, imperfect, or described in contradictory ways. Dan even wrote a book called God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, available at a book signing table near you. And I won't be surprised if he mentions some of these passages tonight. I also wrote a book on these passages called Hard Sayings, available at a book signing table near you. So let me offer 5 thoughts that occurred to me after reading Dan's book. 1, God gives rules to help his children understand his unique glory and strive to imitate him as the perfect standard of goodness itself. When God does this with the goal of keeping his children away from cruel, pagan deities that promote sexual perversions, including bestiality and incest.
I guess, I mean, he's moved past this moment in the argument, but it does make me think a little bit. If we go back to this idea about his proof of God's existence through having no potentiality, through being kind of necessary and actual. Is it possible to be good and to be a model of good if you have no potentiality? I mean, even within the kind of Genesis story, not Genesis 1, but Genesis 2, where there's the knowledge of good and evil, right? There has to be this kind of bifurcation, this moment of possibility. And it's kind of inconceivable to me that there could be something that's good if it happened as a matter of course. If it happened simply out of necessity. So I'm still stuck on this necessity argument. But
as well as horrors like child sacrifice, Dan calls him a megalomaniacal, petty, racist, homophobic control freak. Or at least Richard Dawkins does, and Dan backs him up on that. 2, when God protects his people from violent enemies, Dan calls him bloodthirsty and vindictive. When God punishes nations who committed atrocities for centuries and takes away the gift of life that's within his right to reclaim, he's called a genocidal ethnic cleanser. But when God does nothing and allows violent enemies or disasters to befall his people as punishment for grave sins like murder and adultery, he's called infanticidal, pestilential, cannibalistic, aborticidal. So the atheist is ironically saying to God, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. 4, Dan also misunderstands.
I mean, this is one of the things, I probably would be equally annoyed by these kinds of arguments if I read this guy's book, Dan Barker's book. I mean, it's just kind of like the edgelord atheist arguments where the way that it usually works is like, okay, if God causes things and bad things happen, then God causes bad things to happen. God is evil. It's simplistic towards the complexity of people's faith practice and religious understanding. But I think it's also something that in this debate, maybe this actually would be the moment for that argument, because the way that Trent seems to be kind of describing God is this all about causality, right? If you prove God through these ideas about causality, you do maybe kind of land yourself in this classical theodicy problem. If God is the kind of unmoved mover, this Aristotelian idea of God. So I don't know. They both seem to be kind of like not at the top level of the kind of argument that I would hope to have around a debate. I mean, does the Christian God exist? I actually don't expect too much from these debates because these are usually the folks that we get. I know that you like this person, Scary, so I don't want to say too many mean things, but
the Bible's non-literal language. Psalm 91:4, for example, says that God will cover you with his feathers, but he's not a chicken. When we teach people about realities beyond their existence, you have to start with simple, non-literal explanations. For example, in introductory chemistry, electrons are described as tiny tennis balls that neatly orbit the nucleus.
I'm kind of a mean already. It doesn't take much for me to be mean. You can ask my students.
That don't have defined points. So in the same way, God is definitely a reality beyond our experience. So it's not surprising the Bible represents God coming down to our level and using simple, non-literal descriptions of himself so that ancient people could understand him.
This is kind of an aside, but I think it's interesting to describe the non-literal as the simple. This has been a kind of classical move in allegoresis. So Origen, one of the early Christian interpreters, uses a lot of allegory to interpret the Bible and to say, okay, like one of the famous moments is this idea of Jonah in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament is in the belly of the whale for 3 days as a kind of allegory for Christ kind of being in the tomb for 3 days. So these are these kinds of classical examples. He's saying that that's simpler, and in a certain way, it could be the way that he's describing it. But it seems to me like the simpler mode is the literal. I don't know. I wonder what you think about that.
That means God's anger refers to how our sin separates us from God. And God's jealousy refers to how he is like a husband who is zealous to protect his wife. The Hebrew word rendered jealous, or kana, even means zeal. It also means that descriptions of God lifting up skirts or making people eat their children aren't literal. They reflect a developing theology that did not distinguish between God directly causing evil and merely permitting it to happen. And so it was often conflated. That means God is not, as Dan says, a sadomasochistic, misogynistic bully. Moreover, the non-literal language can be seen in the alleged commands that
like the
Israel
audience
wipe
shot
out or
of
utterly
just being
destroy
like
the Canaanites. King Merneptah of Egypt used similar
this does
language
suggest something
to describe
about
the
this debate.
complete destruction of Israel, even though Israel continued to exist for centuries after that point. So the language can be...
Do you know what order of nuns that is that have the blue habits? I don't think I know what that order of nuns is. Maybe you know, Scary.
Even though Israel continued to exist for centuries after that point. So the language can be read to talk about radical separation, not extermination. Dan also ignores the Bible's context. He says God is unforgiving, but the passages he cites refer to people who refuse to seek God's forgiveness. Dan says God is unjust for punishing people's descendants. But these passages refer to descendants suffering the effects of their ancestors' sins.
That makes sense.
Or being punished for imitating those sins directly. Now, Dan may say my appeal to context is just an excuse. But watch his presentation and ask yourself tonight, is Dan making a rigorous argument for his case about the God of the Bible or the Christian God, including context and surrounding verses? Or is he just throwing as many Bible verses as he can at you?
So one thing that's interesting so far about this is like the idea of like rigor and context. Hey, what's up, Sabatic? You're back. I feel like if the audience are layman Christians, this may be confusing. Then again, I don't know anything about Christian religion or religion in general, so a lot of these arguments may be going overhead. Yeah, I mean, I don't blame you. Like, I do happen to be able to follow these arguments, but like this is pretty niche. You know, I would agree. And I assume based on like the view of the audience that we got that like everyone here is like pretty down. They're like pretty here for it. I mean, it's a full audience though. Look at that. But you know, there's some nuns in the audience and stuff. So yeah, it's not for as you say the layman. It's not for that. But it's kind of interesting, I think, even if you're not a religious person, to think about theological arguments. Kenneth Burke, who you know I talk about in class, so you've heard this, I think. Kenneth Burke talks about, he has a whole book called The Rhetoric of Religion, and he proposes calling his study of religion logology, which means words about words. And he thinks that, and I'm kind of inclined to agree, maybe not quite as enthusiastically as Burke is. I don't think it's the only way we can think about theology, or the only way we can think about what he's proposing about what theology might show us, which is that theology is a particularly potent way of thinking about argument, because we have, as Trent Horn kind of made this distinction in the beginning between the material and immaterial. I think Burke would be kind of like, it's the purely symbolic realm. It's the realm where like symbols kind of show themselves most clearly, and not just in the sense that we can't see God, so therefore he's a symbol. Also in the sense that like so much of human life and institutions is organized around theological ideas and language and arguments. So it's worth kind of knowing something about it if you want to like navigate the world as a non-religious person, because many of the people that you're going to meet are profoundly moved by this. Now, not everybody is as deeply in the theology of their religious practice as others. Some religious practices, theology is extremely important, some is less important. Theology sometimes can be kind of counter to religious belief in weird ways. So it's a complicated topic for sure. But I think that you're right to say that I don't think that he does a good job, even for like a particular audience that's coming here, like who may not have read Dan Barker's book. He doesn't do a good job of kind of giving us just a little bit of contextualization to understand the force of his arguments. And I think this is partly because of his strategy, which is he talks here about rigor versus context. And in his part where he's doing like the theological proof of God's existence, it's all about rigor. He's like, it's like the like hype guy in the trap beat. He's going, so he's got like all of these proofs, and then when he gets to the scripture, he's like, it's all contextual. It's all about meaning. He's like bringing in the Hebrew and stuff, and he's treating that like it's part of the same kind of discourse. But those are two different discourses. It's like hermeneutics, the interpretation of scripture. It's understanding in context and history, and like the most rationalized view of theology, where it's just like proof follows proof follows proof. And it's an interesting strategy, but it's not one that I find particularly persuasive, because I'm like, why can't we have the context in that first part? Why can't you do the kind of interpretive moves around all of those terms? Because those terms have history too. They might not be terms that appear in scripture, but they also have contexts that appear in like human life and history. And he kind of doesn't deal with those as well, I don't think. That's my sense of it. But
God made Job suffer for no reason. But the point of this story about Job is to refute the common ancient belief that bad things only happen to bad people.
Speech.
Even morally good people suffer. But God is all-powerful. He can infinitely make up for any suffering we endure in this life.
He can infinitely make up for any suffering we endure in this life. That seems like a kind of interesting claim. I wonder if he'll defend it.
But if Dan is right, then the accidental universe we live in is what is truly capricious or arbitrary. Richard Dawkins even said the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Ironically, Dan's views on the Bible open the door for one more argument that proves God exists. I'm sure Dan wouldn't change his belief about the Bible, even if every other human being did.
So this is one of the reasons that like I get frustrated, not here actually with Trent Horn, but more with, I mean, I think he's representing Richard Dawkins' arguments a little bit ungenerously, but not too much. And this is kind of the argument, which is like the reduction downwards. Like the truth is in the kind of most reduced vision of things. And it is this weird thing of like, what's really true about the universe is that that it's completely indifferent. Well, I'm in the universe. I'm not indifferent. How do you miss that with your microscope? It's pretty weird. And like why does my lack of indifference need to be explained by like a cosmological principle on either side? Seems like people kind of miss the question of scale. That there are lots of things that exist, and you can only see them at a certain scale. If you do everything at the broadest scale, God is the only actual. God has to exist because at a certain scale there has to be this kind of unmoved mover, or like God can't exist because when we look through our electron microscope we only see atoms. Like there's a lot of stuff in between those two scales.
But this shows morality isn't determined.
I'm sure that sounds really dumb, stupid.
But if moral facts transcend society, then what are they? How could they exist and command us to act in a universe with no purpose or design? Laws of nature tell us the way the world is, not the way it should be. And so perfect universal moral commands must come from a perfect universal person, or what we call God. So let me be clear, difficult passages in the Bible...
If something has kind of certain qualities, it has to come from something that also has those qualities. Not very good as a principle of argument. Lots of things have qualities, like things that are good that come from things that are not good, or they come from things that are mixed. Things have qualities that are like something is pink, which comes out of things that are not pink, white and red. So, is that if we were to accept the idea that there are moral laws that are perfect and universal? Not sure I'm ready to accept that. Does that mean that there has to be a perfect and universal person or being that has said those? I don't know. That seems like a little bit of sloppy logic.
Bible do not refute my arguments for the existence of God or the historical evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. In order to make his case, Dan has to refute those points that I've presented. You can still believe the Christian God exists, even if you're not sure what to make of some puzzling passages in the Bible.
I agree with that.
But look at it this way. Jesus trusted the Old Testament as divine revelation. And if a man can walk out of his own tomb and vindicate his claim to being the infinite God who created everything, then I'm going to put my faith not only in him, I'll put my faith in the church he established and the Bible it gave us. And that faith is not blind. It is trust based on evidence you can see I've clearly laid out tonight that shows the Christian God exists. Right on cue.
Terrible. That's a terrible sound at the end. Why did they choose that one? It's so abrasive. Okay. While they're clapping, you're going to get a beer.
Dan will be down here in front because he wasn't able to bring his computer up to the podium. So for his opening statement to the negative, he will be up here in front of all of you.
I don't know. Scary. Is this interesting? I have no idea. Is this worthwhile? Oh my gosh. This is a fun way to spend a Thursday for me, so why not? Okay, let's skip ahead.
Can you hear me here? Is
we
this
can
on?
hear you.
How do we turn it on? How do we turn it on?
How's the audio on the YouTube video?
Nope. Well, the clock doesn't start until we get this going.
It's always good to see some like old man just like
here?
fumbling with the microphone. This is the ritual
hello.
that we need to get. It sounds good. Okay. Don't worry about trying something else though. I have no other ideas.
Somebody pray for a miracle.
I think what I learned is that I should stop trying to do things.
They covered
Just
it.
let things happen.
Oh, there it is.
It'll always be better. That's my new philosophy. Yeah. I'm sure that my perspective is different from yours, but I don't know how different it is.
Wait a second.
He does this for... Okay, we got to skip ahead. It's not funny anymore.
The God of the American...
Okay.
I used to preach that he does. Eventually, I saw the... My rebuttal, I will respond to Trent's remarks.
Why do they do this? I tell my students not to do this, and like I know, like if you watch a debate, this is what people do. I will now rebut my opponent. We know it's a freaking debate. Just get into your argument. Be a little exciting. Do something with the beginning of your freaking speech, other than fumble with the microphone. Ugh, so many dullards.
Does the Christian God exist?
Sorry,
I used to preach that he does. Eventually, I saw the light. I threw out the bathwater, and I found out there's no baby there. The Christian God does not exist. And why are we debating just the Christian God tonight? Why not debate the existence of the God of the American Indian tribe to which I belong, the Lenape God, who
I should say something like, I'm not a professional either. I don't know what you think I'm a professional at. I guess I put that in the prof does make it seem like I'm a professional. I'm really not. That's a lie. I'm just another guy. Wasn't a fan of Barker's argument, mainly found that he dodged Trent even though Trent was all over the place. Okay, let's check it out. I don't have a high hopes for... Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I can't change the name of the channel now. It's still pretty bad. I might need to make a new channel. The names are so
evil
bad.
Snake under the Moneta River in what is now Manhattan Island. Such a debate would be silly, wouldn't it? Because it's culture. But if God exists...
Because it's culture. What did I miss? I'm not going to go back.
Why are we debating at all? Why does God need arguments? Why does he need proofs? Why not reveal himself or herself to me directly? Is he too weak to speak for himself? He needs somebody like Trent to explain it to us? This very debate is one evidence against the existence of a God.
Oh, that is such a bad argument. It does make me like Trent Horn more already. Because why doesn't, like, this debate isn't, well, you know what? I'm starting to feel that. This debate might be an argument against the existence of God.
First, let me briefly summarize some of the general arguments against the generic God, and then I'll get to the specific Christian God. Atheism is the lack of a belief in a God or gods. It's not a religion. If all the religions of the world were like a TV list of channels of all the religions, atheism would not be on that list. Atheism would be the off button. It's the none of the above.
That's such a weird metaphor, dude.
There's an old joke. that if atheism is a religion, then baldness is a hair color.
Wow, this guy is an amazing maker of terrible metaphors. Is his argument that God wouldn't want people to question the existence of him? I think his argument is that, like, if God existed, he would just manifest himself in the world with such compelling force that it would be unquestionable. Which is an interesting kind of vision of God, but also not only of God, that many people have. Many people imagine that the truth itself just manifests itself. This view of the truth, that the truth is kind of self-evident and it appears, is a very powerful one. It's also, though, kind of contested by many other views of the truth that the same people say, which is like, well, the truth has to kind of be uncovered through the right method, and that there's all these kind of lies that cover it up that we have to get through. So which is it, people? Does the truth manifest itself in appearance, or is the truth hidden and requires science or religion or whatever to see it? Maybe neither of these is totally satisfactory as views of truth. But we talked about Job in the last speech, and one of the interesting things in the book of Job, which, again, even as a non-religious person, as a work of world literature, the book of Job, I mean, Ecclesiastes and Job, I would say, you should read if you go to college. Job has a moment where God does appear, and it's theophany. God just appears, and God's like, "Did you know I made whales?" God just starts listing stuff that he made. It's pretty wild, because there's these long ass Job. The book of Job is a kind of debate. It's a series of debates, a series of arguments between Job and his friends, and a young man who might be his friend. And then God appears, and he's just like, BTFO, everybody. But it's a weird book. Like, even in the kind of light of God's appearance, it's not totally clear that Job is convinced. He's just kind of like, okay, you're God. What else can I say? It's interesting.
Or as Bill Maher said it, celibacy is a sex position. We atheists don't have the burden of proof. The one who makes the claim has the burden of
Citing
proof.
Bill Maher.
Atheism is a lack of belief.
This guy is not my
because,
vibe.
first, there's a lack of even a coherent definition of God. Most believers say God is spirit, but that word spirit has never been positively defined. If you can't define it, you may as well say God is a flisterdoodle or something.
Okay. So this is a theory of definition that... Okay, you know what? Actually, let's hear a little bit more. Let's see if he gives a definition of anything.
Many definitions of God contain mutually exclusive characteristics, such as omniscience versus omnipotence, or omnipotence versus omnibenevolence, or free will versus omniscience. I discussed the free will argument for the non-existence of God, Fang, in my book, Free Will Explained. If you know the future, you cannot have free will. Arguing for a contradictory God is like arguing for a married bachelor. If you can't define it...
So we're back to this. I talked before about in the first speech that Trent Horn gave, which was about this like analytic proposition. That is the kind of classic example. Bachelors are unmarried as an analytic statement, right? Yeah, he's just trying to sell his book. Exactly. He is just trying to sell his book. So we'll listen to a little bit more of his argument, I think, but... The idea that you can't, like, in order to define something, it needs to be analytically true. Yeah, they both are trying to. Yeah, this is a book talk framed as a debate, because that is a way to generate interest. I mean, YouTube itself is a platform. If you want to go into like thinking about why are we all watching this on YouTube? YouTube as a platform partly exists through about a decade of videos about atheism versus Christianity, and Christian defends himself from atheist, that YouTube's algorithm discovered people will watch for like hours, like we are doing right now, that contributed to many weird effects of like what YouTube is today. So all of this stuff really draws people's interest, because there's probably a lot of reasons, but I think people are when you're very kind of convicted of something that seems to color your entire worldview, the fact that another person could have such a seemingly opposed worldview, like you want to hear what they have to say because you want it to like go away and not be itching you that could like exist in the world, those possibilities. So these kinds of debates tend to be about like demolishing and destroying the viewpoints of the other person. This is better than that, I would say that much, but not too much better.
That it can't exist. Then there's a lack of good evidence for a God. If there were really good evidence, by now somebody should have won the Nobel Prize for pointing out the existence of some hitherto unknown force in the cosmos.
Okay, today is June 1st.
Oh, God.
Say your name and spell it.
The ads.
I'm God, G-O-D.
That was the best ad I've ever gotten on a YouTube video.
Public debates, by now I would have seen something that counts as evidence for...
So, I mean, pretty much the only thing that Trent Horn did in the first part of his debate was, like, define God and offer evidence for why he thinks God exists. Now, Dan Barger could say, I don't think the definition of God that Trent Horn offered makes sense, or I don't think it's valid, or I don't think it's true, it's not compelling. And he could have said, this evidence is kind of circular, or it's weak. But because he has a PowerPoint, he has to go through the points he already has. He can't. So it's not much of a debate, because he can't really interact with what his opponent said. And this is the kind of view of debate that we get from most people, which is two people with opposed viewpoints say what they think. Rather than we have a proposition that kind of creates two positions that have to interact in order to defend themselves. Very different kinds of discourse. This is mostly what we get, kind of two people who we already recognize as not agreeing, just kind of saying whatever they think. And we hope that kind of like, that's enough disagreement.
A God. There's also a lack of good argument. Bertrand Russell said most of these theological arguments, teleological, cosmological, ontological, and so on, simply boil down to bad grammar. They are bad logic. They beg the question. And during rebuttal, I'll show how Trent has begged the question. When the ancients heard the thunder and they saw the lightning, the only way they could explain it was by invoking Thor or Zeus. But now that we know something about electricity and the weather, we don't need those gods to fill those gaps. Those gaps closed, those gods died.
So this is like a very classical explanation of religious belief, not a very compelling one. I mean, and it's not even just a question about whether you're religious or not. I mean, there are many people that study early religion and anthropology that have much more interesting and compelling accounts of how religion develops in human civilization, or whatever we call religion, not necessarily a great term for it. The idea that they were using it to explain natural phenomenon is kind of laughable, because why would you need to explain natural phenomenon? There's plenty of stuff we don't explain. One of my favorite early explanations comes from Jean-Baptiste Vico in the 18th century in his book, The New Science, where his interpretation is, I'm not going to say I believe it, like it's kind of universally true in every case, but there's something about it that speaks to me. It's kind of poetic. He's like he calls them cyclops. Early humans heard the thunder, but they heard it as like anger, because everything that we don't understand, we attribute, we try to relate to something about us. So when we're really loud and kind of rumbly, that sounds like anger. So we interpret the sky as being angry. And so then we try to kind of figure out why the sky is angry. And this is actually, for him, the invention of language, not just religion. It's the invention of language, writing, and religion all at one moment. Because, like, the writing is the lightning bolt across the sky. Like, all this stuff means something. Excuse me. But the early person doesn't know what it means. So actually, language is invented at this moment of non-understanding, of being like, it has to mean something, but I don't know what. I don't know, I just think it's interesting.
There are still gaps, and that's what drives science. But to throw up our hands and say, Thor did it, or God did it, well, that's just laziness. Then there's a lack of agreement among believers about the nature and the moral principles of God. Paul said, let there be no division among you. Yet the religions of the world, especially Christianity, are hopelessly fractured into divisive camps. Sunnis and Shias, Protestants and Catholics, they're killing each other over these trivial, irrelevant doctrinal differences. Paul also said God is not...
Who are they relevant to? Obviously, if you're in a community of believers, they're relevant. So taking this position where you're just kind of assuming that these doctrinal differences have no value doesn't really engage with the... I mean, that is really kind of the moment of begging the question here. Why are they irrelevant? It's like, he's like, it proves that it's irrelevant because It's irrelevant.
The author of confusion. But can you think of a single book that's caused more confusion than the Bible? You believers should first get your act together before you come talk to us non-believers. Name any moral issue society is struggling with right now. You will find good, Bible-believing, church-going Christians on both sides of those controversies. The Bible is worthless as a moral guide. It's a pick and choose. Then there's the lack of a...
What's wrong with the guide that you pick and choose from? If I get a travel guide, I'm not going to be like, okay, this is a guide to Sicily. This is a guide to Florence. I need to go everywhere. I don't know. Some people have an image of morality that what's important about morality is its consistency and its universality. Well, that's one view. That's not necessarily the only view of what morality is like.
A good reply to the problem of evil. All you have to do is walk into any children's hospital and you know that a good God does not exist. Those parents are praying desperately. Their children die at a rate no different from random, uncaring chance. Nothing fails like prayer, and we all know that. Most important, there's no need for a God.
I like that as an ad for prayer. Nothing fails like prayer.
Loving, joyful, moral, charitable, purposeful, and hopeful lives without believing in a God. Now, let's talk about the Christian God specifically. The Christian God is the deity who is revealed in the Bible and also in the church. Most Christians are good people, but the God they worship is morally corrupt. The Bible has many unbelievable
he's not even, you're right, he's trying to sell his book. He's not even trying to.
Demons and the Nile River turning to blood, the sun stand.
The way that these kind of people often get their kind of credit, they're like, this is the kind of, there's many versions, many variations on this. The person who's like, I used to be a communist, but then I saw the light. And they're going to like the most virulent anti-communist you could imagine. Or someone who's like, I used to be Muslim, but then I understood. So this conversion story that people have when they're like, I used to be, that kind of counts for all of the empathy that they want. But really, it's not a message to the community of believers or the community of whatever kind of community that they defected from. It's really to the other people to be like, look, even someone who used to believe could now sees what we believe. So it kind of performs through their identity the whole argument. The argument's never made, it's just assumed. Like, well, if they believed and now they don't, then there must be a problem with it. Abby Johnson. Who's Abby Johnson? I mean, there's so many. I mean, these kinds of people are a dime a dozen. You know, every conceivable version of this exists, but it's a really good way to have a media career is to have one political identity and then be like, oh, I'm so horrified of what I used to believe. Then you'll have a media career forever. I don't know who Abby Johnson is though, but
standing still, animal species floating in one large box. That all sounds kind of crazy, but I actually think people should read the Bible. Reading the Bible has turned many people into atheists. A. Milne said, properly read, he said, the Old Testament is responsible for more atheism than any book ever written. Please read the book. Isaac Asimov agreed.
A. Milne was the guy who wrote Winnie the Pooh. The people he's bringing into sight here are amazing. Like, what a interesting gallery of people.
The Bible is the most potent force for atheism ever conceived. But for our topic tonight,
he went to like azquotes.com right the night before.
Shows
this is what all of my students do. I'm kidding. But my students do much better than this. But this kind of thing of like the stereotypical, it's amazing how much better what students do than this is. Makes me feel bad that they're like, yeah, we should all get A's. Maybe they should. If this is the standard, like, holy crap.
It's horribly evil.
Not very good.
The Bible itself even says a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit. It follows that a good God who is evil not only does not exist, he cannot exist. The alpha male deity in the Bible reflects the fears, the ignorance, the
alpha male deity.
And the patriarchy.
Wait, can we just appreciate that phrase? The alpha male deity. Oh my God.
Patriarchal Israelites who wanted to preserve their property, including their wives and their slaves. Richard Dawkins got it right. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in
Alpha, male, omega.
Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving, control-free, a vindictive,
See, you know more about religion than you're letting on.
Cleanser,
It's pretty funny.
a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal,
God is
filicidal,
canceled.
pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic,
It's so lame.
capriciously malevolent
It's so lame.
bully. He's right. Richard asked me to document each of those nasty adjectives, and it became the book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, with more than 1,500 passages in context.
So, like, a much better version of this is a book called Milton's God, written by a literary critic, who makes the argument. He says, John Milton's argument in Paradise Lost is to justify God's ways to man. And what Milton's poem shows the kind of his colossal failure to do this, because by far the most sympathetic character in Paradise Lost is Satan. But this guy's not making as
and taking into account the language of the Bible, describing those exact characteristics
William Empson wrote
by God's own words and actions. God. He is not a good God. Here's a few examples. God's an ethnic cleanser. Read it. You shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land, for I have given you the land to possess. The Israelites were the murderous, colonizing invaders. They were the ones causing the problem. The Canaanites were living there, not much different from the Israelites, whose religion was just about the same as theirs in many ways. Utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant. God is genocidal. You must not let anything that breathes remain alive. You shall annihilate them. Even if that's metaphorical, that's ugly. So they utterly destroyed the men, the women, the little ones of every city, left none to remain. There's dozens of passages of genocide commanded, condoned, and committed by the Christian God. God is unjust.
Excuse me, Professor. That's not the Christian God. Sorry, Jews would like to claim their God back from you. Telling people they support genocide if they support Christianity is not going to make the target audience want to switch. Yeah, I mean, quite obviously not. Yeah, so persuasion is not really what's on the minds here. It's more like embarrassment. The idea of, like, I think that the way that persuasion is being imagined here is like, if I can shame you, if I can kind of like pull off all of your clothes and show the nudity of your beliefs, show how absurd they are, and embarrass you. That's what persuasion looks like. You're going to be naked just like the truth. But it's also just that this is the most hackneyed version of these arguments. Like, which person coming to this debate who is a believing Christian or any kind of religious person who cares about the Bible hasn't heard this argument before? They've read the Bible. I mean, maybe they haven't, but they probably are aware of this moment in the Bible. So it's just like, surely what you should do is figure out, well, what's their justification to themselves of how that is reconcilable with their own faith. This is not news. And then make an argument on the basis of that. Not just like, because people already resolve this stuff back into their own understanding of their faith. Same issues happens in politics. Never works. Feeling attacked just makes you want to defend yourself, not appearance. Yeah. And like again and again, we prove this. And again, people keep doing this because what they really like is feel the sense of dominating other people or the sense of like being smarter or this kind of bullshit. But it is interesting to think about this question though, which I called earlier theodicy, which is like the justification of God. That's really what dike in Greek means, justice. So like, how could God be just given these things? And there are changing conceptions of justice in history and in time. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about. It's actually particularly interesting to see what very serious apologists do, whether they're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or so on, or Hindu, when there are stories about a deity who is destructive or seems kind of motivated by something that's unbecoming to our sense of what divinity should look like. Sometimes it's allegory. Sometimes it's kind of something that's mystical or arcane, or sometimes it's like doubling down and being like, yeah, it was okay then, or God changes in history. There's lots of different theories, which are much more interesting to think about and which he could deal with if he wanted to spend the time. You know, he said he's a pastor, but being a pastor doesn't mean that you're like deeply read in your faith. I mean, anybody can go to school and get a degree in this stuff. You don't have to be that. You don't have to think about it that much.
I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of the parents. That is just wrong. God is homophobic. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It's an abomination. They shall be put to death. Their blood is upon them. I think that should settle it right there. If the Bible says homosexuality is wrong, then the Bible is wrong, not homosexuality. The bigoted men, those bigoted men who wrote those words were
original
cruel and violent. God
freaking bacon arguments. Awesome. Reddit moments have happened.
Bible, Job 2:3. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? You incited me against him to destroy him for no reason.
Yeah, maybe it's interesting to think about why that's in the Bible. That the Lord, first of all, the Lord is speaking to Satan. Like this would be a weird moment to just be like, yeah, look, God admits. He admitted, like the meme. He admitted, like God admits. But it's like, wait a minute, you missed like the much bigger kind of question here, which is like God's speaking to Satan. And like in the beginning of the book, they kind of gamble. So it's like, you really do. I mean, I think that Trent Horn does kind of win on that point of just being like, Dan Barker doesn't like understand anything about how to interpret a text. He's just like, look, for no reason. It's like, yeah, look at everything else, even in the what you selected. Just so dumb.
God confessed that he tortured a good man and killed his children for no reason. That's his words. That should earn a conviction of first-degree murder and mayhem, and yet you believers worship this God.
I would like to accuse God for creating me, not for killing me. Bring it, God. I'm watching this debate. Please send down your fire and rain upon me. I like the Greek wisdom that's like, the gods have cursed us by making us be.
God is aborticidal. Because she has rebelled against her God, their little ones shall be dashed in pieces and their pregnant women ripped open. These are the words of God. Even if it's metaphorical, this is ugly. May the Lord cause you to become a curse among your people when he makes your womb miscarry. God is neither pro-choice nor pro-life in the Bible. He's the greatest abortionist in history.
This really just speaks to the kind of absolute parochial provincialness of Americans, where they're like their own sense of politics as like not only the only thing that matters in the world, but like absolutely universalizable to everything in the world and outside of it, including God. Just like God's not pro-choice or pro-life. It's like what a parochial point of view of like how to understand the cosmic deity. Whether you think God exists or not, like wouldn't you assume that the creator and potential destroyer of all life maybe has other considerations? I don't know. Does God create Satan in the Bible, or does he just exist like the Christian God? So in the book of Job, it's not really clear. Shaitan just means like the adversary, So like we get the word Satan. There's all these kinds of questions of language involved too, and you have the Bible that he's referring to is a document that's written over a huge amount of time, and in at least two different languages, because the Hebrew Bible is written in Hebrew and the Christian Bible, the New Testament, is written in Greek at a totally different time. So it's like so complicated, hard to get into. But there are angelologies and other texts outside of the canonical Bible that describe Satan. This is what the Paradise Lost is kind of about, which is an English poem. But usually the idea is that a certain angel fell. This angel was named Lucifer, the light bearer. And in Islam has like, I think, the best version of how Satan gets created, which is God creates man, and Iblis, that's the Muslim version of a similar character. And God's like asks all the angels to bow down to human beings who he's just created. And Iblis refuses. He's like, I won't bow down to human beings. They're not superior to me. And in a certain sense, he's right. Like, fucking angels, They're way superior to human beings. So it's like an interesting moment. But yeah, so it's usually this kind of thing of an angel gets jealous of human beings or something like that and falls. But there are different versions of this story.
What about Jesus? Wasn't he nicer than the Old Testament Lord? Well, Jesus said, I and the Father are one. The Father's in me and I am in the Father. The New Testament is a huge missed opportunity. Jesus should have apologized for his bloodthirsty Father. Instead, he said, whoever has seen me has seen the Father. And his Father, as we see, is indeed a mean-spirited narcissist. If this cartoon villain really
I mean, if you were God, wouldn't you? But God, you have a God complex.
Much less my worship. The Bible says a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit. Can we really call the Christian God evil? Is that the right word? Yes, we can. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will bring evil upon this place. They comforted Job for the evil that the Lord had brought upon him.
He keeps forgetting he's reading a translation.
Explicitly committing evil.
He's like, look, it says it right there. It's like, yeah,
God's
it's
evil,
translated into English.
And look at the last verse there. Job asked his wife,
a little more scholarship is required.
Shall we not receive
claim,
evil? In the same verse, God is portrayed as both good and evil, that very word. God also describes himself as a terrorist, but we don't have time to read all of these. The terror
he
from God
describes
fell upon
himself
the
as
city.
a terrorist.
Terror,
yeah, all of this is just like people who he doesn't know any language but English. I'm gonna put. I bet $1,000.
He's calling himself an evil terrorist. I'm not saying this. These are not my words. These are the words from the book that describes the Christian God.
God says I'm an
Christians
evil terrorist.
Say God is good, but their book shows
Citation
that he
needed.
is actually evil. He's a married bachelor, an evil good person. Therefore, the Christian God cannot exist. If you worship this wicked deity, you have serious problems with moral judgment. Those passages I just read are just a tiny sample. You don't have to buy my book.
How much longer
you can
is
find
this?
them all for free at unpleasantgod.ffrf.org.
Unpleasant man.
I haven't mentioned the contradictions or historical and scientific mistakes in the Bible, but it's clear that the Christian God comes from a book that is unreliable.
I wonder whether he was more annoying as a pastor or now. Like probably exactly the same amount of annoyingness, but I don't know. Maybe he was a better person when he believed.
Tied to truth or
so annoying.
Morality. What do you think is more likely? That the Bible is the product of an immaterial supernatural creator, or that the Bible is the product
I'm not going to
of
watch the entire. I'm just going to
priests
finish his
and
speech.
fearful
And maybe we can
prophets.
talk about it. And
It's written by human beings, after all. Human beings who are imperfect. According to Christianity, God is also revealed through his church. But look at God's church on the planet today. Look at the reports of the pedophile ministers and priests.
He's going for like all the most
Minnesota,
obvious
where
stuff that
millions of
anybody would
dollars
know
have
and
been
think of. Like he
paid
can't
to
develop
victims.
it. He doesn't have any
The
new
6
ideas. He's
dioceses
not
in
original at
Pennsylvania
all.
just this year.
I mean,
The
and
huge
neither is
Boston
Trent Horn, but at least Trent
scandal,
Horn's lack of
Ireland and
originality goes
Chile
back
and
to the
Australia, and now new
12th or
investigations
13th
in
century.
New York
So
and in the
you might not
Netherlands.
know about it.
Clergy who call themselves father are sexually abusing
This is just
children.
like
The Catholic
Huffington
Church,
Post,
all the way
like,
up to
digest.
the top, has covered up the abuse and protected the rapists in their ranks, moving them to other unsuspecting parishes. I think this counts as evil. And although most Catholics are really good people, Trent is a good person, the church that you Catholics support and other Christian churches where you have molested.
So like maybe it is worth talking about this argument. This argument was dealt with in literally the 5th century in Christianity by St. Augustine. So St. Augustine, there's this controversy with this guy, Donatus. I think that's the right one. And there's a certain persecution that's happening with the Roman emperor or something. I don't remember all the details, but some kind of persecution of the Christians happens, and some of the leaders of churches, bishops, important people, hand over the scripture to be burnt, which makes them a traditor, someone who hands something over, also known as a traitor. Not a good look. Hashtag canceled. Not good. And so it's discovered that these, like who these people are, like after the persecution is over, and people are like back, and people are like, wait a minute. And Donatus is like, you can't receive the sacraments from these people. They are bad people, like they betrayed our faith. So if you received baptism from these people, you're not really baptized, because if a bad person gives you a sacrament, it's invalid. And this causes it's just a giant headache. If you could imagine like the bureaucratic nonsense that would have to go in if you had to like determine whether someone did something that was good, they were a good person. So I like to imagine that Augustine, just because he's like a good administrator, he's like a good Roman still, he's like, okay, this is like too complicated. Like, what theological argument can I come up with to stop this from happening? And his argument is something like the office of, in this case, priesthood, but any office, you could make the argument, you could extend the argument. Any office has powers that the individual doesn't have. Like, the individual might be a bad person, they may not be good, they might be incompetent, but simply by having the office, they have all of those powers. They can kind of confer those things. So someone is able to give the sacraments because they all have the office, not because they're a good person. So Catholics today I don't say that Catholics aren't concerned about pedophilia in the church, and there are certainly people that have left the church on the basis of the innumerable scandals. I mean, some of them are really, truly, all of it is atrocious, but some, I don't want to talk about it. I mean, some of this stuff is really, really horrifying to someone of faith, specifically. It's all horrifying to any human being with a conscience, but... Nevertheless, I think there are many people that don't find this to be a conflict with belief, because they're like, wow, it's like truly sinful. And of course, Satan would want to tempt those who are the most holy, because like this is, so they would expect there to be this kind of struggle in the places of holiness and sacrality, even though, it's profoundly disappointing and very sad. It doesn't to them challenge their belief. So it's just like he doesn't understand enough about the tradition that he's talking to make the arguments that could actually be
ministers. It is a morally corrupt institution. If a
Scary, you might disagree with me. I don't know.
Christian God really
existed,
existed,
maybe I'm talking out my ass.
This would not be happening. Trent, I would like to ask you, as a moral person, isn't it time for you to quit that Catholic Church, that immoral institution that is harming people and absolving themselves and avoiding responsibility for their actions? So let me sum up. Since there is no coherent definition or good evidence or good argument,
I like the shot to him. He looks so pissed.
Among believers, and there's no need for a God. And since the Christian God is impossibly good and evil, it makes perfect sense to say that this God does not exist. And by the way, those passages that I quote to you, Trent says I took them out of context. I did no such thing. I was very careful to explain the context, the original words in the Hebrew and sometimes in the Greek. They are actually truly representing what God himself said. And I
remember him doing that one time, but I was kind of interrupting him a bunch. So
if those are just figures of speech, then the whole Bible could be a metaphorical figure of speech.
Yes,
God
exactly.
Himself.
Yes, in fact, one might say with Nietzsche, a true lover of Christianity, that language is a mobile army of metaphors. That everything that you might say originates as a metaphor. But that's just the very pious Nietzsche who thought that.
Could just be a metaphorical figure of speech too. We don't even have to take anything seriously in the Bible if we can't take it at face value. We all know when Jesus said, "I am the door," we don't look for hinges in a doorknob. We all know that. But in these verses that I cite to you, the context
also an ancient door wouldn't have hinges, and it would have hinges, but not a doorknob.
A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit. Since the Bible and since the church are representations of God, the Christian God, then that God not only does not exist, that God cannot exist.
Oh, man. What do they do after this? Do they talk to each other? Is it worth watching any more of this? Oh my God, that awful sound. Awful sound. Well, I think that this is interesting to watch. I'm not very impressed by either of them, but for very different reasons. All right. I thought that particular theory of metaphors originated with Aquinas, not Nietzsche. I would want to look into that for myself. I don't know. I mean, maybe maybe Aquinas also has a theory of language. I don't know much about Aquinas's philosophy of language, but that line comes from a very famous piece that Nietzsche wrote called "On Truth and Lying in a Non-Moral Sense." So a pretty good short piece you can read. I mean, many people have reflected upon the relationship between metaphor and many forms of speech. The idea that a whole work could be a metaphor is like, I don't know, that's like literary criticism 101, you know? Not too hard of a thing to kind of to accept. Something like the Bible, though, is just like too complicated for that kind of analysis, but it's like it doesn't go one way or the other, where he's trying to say, he's like, oh, well, the whole thing would have to be metaphor. But that doesn't disqualify something from being an expression of that's meaningful, you know? So, but yeah, if you know, what's the Aquinas source? Where is Aquinas talking about metaphor? I would like to look into that, so we can kind of trade sources here. It's been a while since I've dove into Aquinas. The last time I had a terrible toothache, so bad associations. But now I think I'm okay. The tooth is gone. So you can let me know about that. I don't know. Yeah, I think this was interesting. I think that most of these debates about, send the video if you want, if you can find it. If the video doesn't source it, then I'll remain skeptical. But yeah. I think I remember you talking about you wanting to read the Summa, and I was like, who is this person? Who is this? What sophomore wants to read the Summa? But that kind of reminds me of me, because I did that in high school. So, yeah. I know. I'm like, I thought that was interesting. Okay, I'll check that out later. I'm not going to click it right now, but that'll be cool to look at and think about. But yeah, so I think if we're going to go back to this original question of how debate looks in our culture right now, I think all the things that we looked at today suggest one of the things that's disturbing me. Oh, analogy, yeah. So he has this famous argument about analogia entis, the kind of analogy of being. He talks a lot about analogy. I don't think I have ever heard anything about Aquinas on metaphor. Though, when Aristotle talks about analogy and metaphor, he kind of talks about them together, and it gets really detailed, and there's lots of detail about, how we should think about it. But I would say that analogy is different from metaphor. You could think about it as a kind of metaphor, maybe, but in the way that Nietzsche means metaphor, it's not the same. It's not an analogy, at least in the way that Aquinas means it. But lots of things to think about there. Rhetoric's really interesting for those kinds of things too. These little details. You're like, oh yeah, that's a metaphor, but metaphor writ large maybe makes you have a different perspective on the world than just like, oh, that's a nice metaphor in a poem. So rhetoric kind of like ups the ante on what these little descriptions of language and linguistic form might mean, or how you might relate to them. And so Nietzsche's kind of gesture of being like, it's all metaphor, I think kind of shows you what it can look like to up the ante on that. But was this a good debate? No. Was this a debate? Maybe. What would be a good debate here? I think that around this question, does the Christian God exist? I have very little hope that a good debate could come around this proposition. Mostly because it's so overdetermined, and what people would expect from it would be like pretty much exactly what we got, where people would like cheer for their team. But I wonder if we could figure out a proposition that would allow people with similar beliefs, or actually, let me rephrase that. People who were religious and people who were not religious would both attend and kind of get something of value that was new. Like that would be an interesting project of being like, well, what would be the kind of debate proposition that would most likely produce something of value? I don't think it would be around the question of existence of God. I don't think that's valuable. I think like even just a slight change of like, believing in God makes for a better life. Like, let's take away the question of whether the belief is true or false. I don't think that's going to lead to an interesting debate, because the sources of faith and belief are going to be different than the sources of skepticism. Doesn't mean that they can't talk to each other. Obviously, we just watched it. But I think what people often care about is, even though they think that they're like, if I have the truth on my side, then everything else has to go away. But what they care about are things like what makes me happy, or what makes me kind of virtuous and good, what's valuable. And if we could have a debate about, what's the value of these things, rather than whether it's true or false, I don't know. I think it might be a more interesting debate. What would you think would be a good a good debate about religion that would allow both religious people and atheists to attend and view it? What would be a good proposition? Getting tons of discourse messages from, something's being canceled for tomorrow. That's all that's happening. Oh my God, my friend's kid has hand and foot mouth disease. Parentheses, he's fine. But that's never good. You never want to have that happen. That's pretty bad. Oh man. I wonder if we should watch another one. Like, I'm not that tired and I don't have to work tomorrow. And now that this thing got canceled I was doing with my friends, I can even like sleep until like 9:30. So if you want to do another one, we can. I might just take a quick break to go to the bathroom because I'm guzzling beer. But also I'm kind of curious if you have any debate propositions on a topic like this, on a religious topic, that you think would produce a better debate. Oh yeah? Okay. So you can talk to each other. I'll be right back. I'm just going to use the restroom real quick. And while I do that, what should I do? I'm just going to leave it like this so you look at this ridiculous sea of people and nuns. I'll be right back. Okay, let's see. What did we come up with? Yeah, I mean, I think that we could just do better, though. We could do better. There are a lot of reasons in political debates people don't want to do it. Something around Pascal's wager? Yeah, that would be interesting. Like, is it worth dedicating one's life for both themselves and others to believe in a deity? Yeah, I think that would be much more interesting. Pascal's wager, in case you're not familiar with Blaise Pascal, the 17th century Jansenist. Yeah, is it Pascal's wager? I wonder how we could phrase it. Would be something like, I'm sure there's a more economical way to phrase it than I would say. Pascal argues that he presents the idea like this. Okay, so on one hand you have, because he also is he's a mathematician. Pascal is a very interesting person. And his Pensées or Thoughts is a book that he wrote that also is really worth reading. And it doesn't really necessarily strike you as, it's kind of like a weird mix of philosophy and religious thinking, but it's really neither. It's kind of, it's a sui generis kind of work of aphorisms or something like that. He says, okay, if on one hand you have eternal damnation, on the other hand you have oblivion in the afterlife. He's like, it always makes sense to bet on eternal damnation, and so, or salvation. There are two options there, and so like even if it's like infinitesimally small possibility, because there's no change in the afterlife. If you're just dead, then it doesn't matter how you live at the end. So you might as well live a life of piety and faithfulness, even if the chance to be small, to saved is very small, because the reward in itself is so infinitely large. That's not a great way of putting it. You can probably put it in better terms than I did, but that's an idea of what Pascal's wager looks like. He also did many mathematical things that are pretty interesting, with like Pascal's triangle, you might know from math class. So it's kind of a weird mathematical, but like a gambler's. So you see the arguments for God's existence from like the European medieval Latin tradition tend to be like, there is a greatest being. The greatest being is God. The being greater than all beings is God. It's arguments like this. So it's like, okay, that's fine. That's fine. But the greatest being might be like the Oscar Mayer Wiener truck. I don't know. That's ridiculous. I mean, you won't accept that. It's kind of it's a semantic or kind of logical argument. Whereas Pascal is like, it's a probability argument. What's better? What's the way you should live? How should you believe? And there's a famous argument by this guy, Ian Hacking, who argues that it's actually the invention of probability in a book called The Invention of Chance. So he's like, 1660 is the invention of statistics as a subject of like modern probability, and it's this argument. Very interesting. So this whole kind of branch of mathematics begins with a theological argument, as is often the case. Yeah, that could be an interesting debate. Like, how should we live? Does belief make for a better life? Something like that. Yeah, I'm just tired of hearing like these hacks talk about the Bible, and they're like, they come up with one Hebrew word and, hey, what's up, Steve? Welcome. We just watched we didn't watch the whole thing, but we watched like a good 30 minutes of a debate about God, God's existence. And I was being kind of mean, I guess, about it. But so we're thinking about, how could we make the debate better? What would be a proposition that would make for a more interesting discourse between believing and unbelieving people? And Scary was suggesting that it would be around Pascal's wager. So we were just talking about what that is. But thanks for stopping by the stream. Appreciate you being here. Yeah, I don't know. Scary, did you watch past this point? Is there anything else that we should watch? Should we just like flip it on it for a while and see if they say anything, like if that terrible whistle blows again?
Thank you, Dan. And on the question of context, I
do
think
the audience ask questions?
Very clear. I asked you, do you think Dan will rigorously
That's what I would like
go
to
through
get
these
to.
verses, giving you the passages before and after and what scholars are saying? Or will he just try to throw as many verses as he can?
Okay, let's go to where the audience asks questions. That might be interesting. I know that they say a lot of things in the middle, but...
So there's much evidence to show that people that affiliate themselves with religion are very content, satisfied, and joyful.
So we already see this is where he's going. This first question, the guy's like, people who have religion are joyful. So
this, along with the promise of eternal life, motivates Christians to spread their message. I would like to ask you, what motivates you to spread your views?
That's great. That's a great question.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
It has nothing to do with whether it's true or not. I mean, we could make an argument that drunk people are pretty happy. That doesn't mean we should go out and evangelize everybody to get drunk so they can be happy. Happiness is nice, but happiness is not a
the church
goal
of the perpetual hangover.
Yeah. I think I know a couple of those. So, but the motivation that drove me into the pulpit was the same motivation that drove me out, and that is to know the truth and speak the truth. I think if you don't go to bed every night with a fear of hell and burning in flames because you might have done something, you might have touched yourself somewhere, or you might have thought an impure thought. My wife, Annie Laurie Gaylor, was raised with no religion at all. Very happy, very
she
moral,
loved touching
very
herself.
good, very fun family, very productive and purposeful and meaningful and good without any idea of a God at all. And I think living in a world without the fear, without the morality based on fear, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and be careful because you're going to be punished. I think if we could get rid of that, we would have a lot happier children in life who would go to bed not worried about this angry deity who's going to punish them for anything. But knowing the truth, I'm going to talk about this a little bit in my closing, but knowing that we are not slaves, that we are not second class in the universe, knowing that we can control and think our own thoughts, we make mistakes a lot, knowing that we, as biological organisms, have some ability to make this world a better place, not hindered by religious divisiveness. I think that's pretty motivating. I'm not saying every atheist should become an atheist evangelist.
Sneferu! Sneferu! It's been so long. Welcome back. Can we define happiness? I don't know. Can we? This is another thing Nietzsche said. He's like, you can't define terms with history. Something like that. But, yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's up for grabs here, where this guy, we can see by this guy's face that he's, like, not convinced by this, by Dan Barker's view of what happiness is. But I don't know. I don't think you can define it. I think that, I mean, well, sure, you can define it. But definition, when we think about definition not as what lexicographers do, this is what we tend to get, where we tend to stop people like, look, it's in the dictionary. Happiness is, well, let's remember what lexicographers do. What's the kind of research that they do? They look to the usage of a linguistic community, and they look for evidence from usually written sources. There's even like a Netflix movie about it now. It's a interesting book, The Professor and the Madman, about the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary. And what does the madman do? This guy gets arrested for murder, and he's, probably what we would call schizophrenic today. And he just has like thousands of books, and he's just like constantly cutting out all of these mentions of particular words and sending them into the Oxford English Dictionary. This is how they do their research, to find out how words are used in a specific context in specific times. It's really the community of language users that give terms their meaning. But they don't give them their meaning like arbitrarily. They give them their meaning through use. And use involves not just the kind of mention of a word, but its practice. What kinds of things people do in response to it. So our understanding of what a term means is a kind of infinite research project. One way I like to think about it is every time you use a term, its meaning changes a little bit. You can think about it like a river. Like the flow of a river changes its own direction. It's kind of slightly kind of moving in a direction. You won't see it over a course of a day or something. You're not going to see any of that change. But if you give it 10, 20, 100, 1,000 years, you're going to see the river changes in its course. Same thing with terms. So it's always changing. It's alive. It's like yeast and bread. You don't think about bread as alive, but it's kind of alive. Same way that language is alive. It's moving. A better way to frame it between the relationship between faith and existence. What do you mean by that, between faith and existence? I think real life Mel Gibson was crazier than the real life Mad Max. Yeah, Mel Gibson recently tried to make a comeback, so is he crazy like Fox or crazy like Fox News? Hard to say. Yeah, the relationship between faith and existence, you mean like between the existence of God, or what existence? But to me, it seems kind of like, I used to say, maybe I was being provocative, but like to say that God exists is a heresy. Like existence is a very kind of low level, low energy vibe. You just exist? Bro, come on. All I know is Blazing Saddles was funny as hell. Yeah, Blazing Saddles is not Mel Gibson, that's Mel Brooks, but Mel Gibson in Blazing Saddles would be very funny. That would be great. They should do a remake. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, that would change what it was about, I think, quite a bit. But yeah, Mel Brooks and Mel Gibson. That would be good. Like, are there any other Mels, famous Mels? Mel Orr? Is that even someone? Swapping Mel Gibson with Mel Brooks with deepfakes. I hope that becomes like a genre of art where people just do like long form deepfakes that just totally mess with, I guess there are people kind of already working on that, but it's still kind of in a goofy level. But maybe at some point it will be like the real thing. Someone recently in a class was like horrified. He like spoke up. He doesn't speak a lot, but he was so horrified at people using the voices of dead people in movies. He was just like, cannot stand that. I wonder what he would think about deepfakes. He'd be horrified too. Mel Blanc. Yeah. Mel Blanc is like, I don't know. I think Mel Blanc's probably funnier than Mel Brooks. Mel Blanc, then Mel Brooks, then Mel Gibson. But it's a full circle because in some sense, Mel Gibson is the funniest. Yeah, he is another famous Mel. That's true. He was also recently clued in the New York Times crossword. So I should have remembered that. Yeah. Okay, let's listen to more of this, I guess.
But atheism is really worth talking about in positive terms because it's like it's like getting rid of a disease or an illness. Trent is deluded. Trent has it's not a mental illness. I'm not saying you're mentally ill, but you have a delusion.
Yeah, this is a very persuasive thing to say to someone. Be like, you're ill. You're sick. I have the cure. The things that you hold most dear to you are evil and bad. I mean...
just talking
I feel
to
better now.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But
oh my God, that terrible sound.
You are suffering under delusion. It would be better for you to get out of that and actually make some real difference in the real world, I think.
I love this guy's vibe where he's just like basketball shorts, like half shaven. That's the right vibe for this debate.
What motivates me to do what I do? Well, I believe that first and foremost, God exists. He raised Jesus from the dead. And Jesus gave us a church. He didn't just give us a Bible to try to figure out what we should believe. He gave us a church to guide people to salvation. And so, yeah, I've met people that are happy, that are moving along with life. But I've also met people that they're doing just fine in life, but they still have these deep, unsettled questions. Well, why is anything here? Or what is going to happen to my loved ones who have died? Are they just forever gone?
This is like a much more compelling answer about motivation than Dan Barker's, I think.
When I do something wrong and nobody finds out about it, why is there still that little voice in here telling me that I've failed to be what I was meant to be? Like I was meant to be something more, that I'm not merely just an accident that has appeared here in the universe, that I have a longing not just for happiness
the jury's out
in this
on
life,
that,
but for infinite happiness. I want to share that with people so they can become good, just like God is perfect goodness himself.
I think you can be a happy accident. I remember another famous person saying that. It's all happy accidents. So, yeah, they both seem kind of like not... I mean, I've already kind of said my piece about this debate and their arguments, but it does seem to me like Trent Horn kind of comes off better in the end here. Not because of like the truth or the falsity of I know the timer sound. Isn't it amazing? They've been doing this the whole time. It's this awful, just like the gym coach, like the overweight gym coach, just like blowing the whistle. Yeah, as it like hangs off his lip, his lower lip. Yeah. Yeah. This was an experience though. This kind of brings me back to younger days and thinking about this question: does the Christian God exist, or does God exist, or whatever? They must be in the basketball gym. It does kind of feel, yeah. It's in some. Was it Missouri? Scary figured it out earlier, but I forget where we are already. Minnesota or Missouri? What was it? I don't remember. Based on his debate style, I was interested in where he went wrong. Yeah, what did you think? I mean, you don't have to agree with me, but I'm curious what you think after watching it again. I don't think he like went wrong. I don't think that's a very helpful kind of framing of what's good or bad about a debate format. It's like, is it correct or incorrect? Minnesota, okay. Minnesota. I think it's more that it's a question of, so the thing that I really didn't like about Trent's performance. Trent is such a good name for like a Catholic apologist too, isn't it? Perfect name. But Barker appealed to his personal experience, but was not very relatable. Bad mix, in my opinion. Yeah, exactly. Like right. I think Snefera, you hit it. If you're going to appeal to your personal experience, it's a way that the reason that's appealing is because people are going to identify with you. So if you appeal to your personal experience and you're like, yeah, and then you suck and you're a giant asshole, people aren't going to identify with your experience. So then it just looks like nothing. It doesn't look like evidence. Doesn't look anything. It just looks like you're being a jerk. Not a good strategy. Very bad mix. But the way that, Trent's arguments at the very beginning of this debate that happened like 2 hours ago when we started watching this was just that he presented, because we're reading and Steve is heading up a reading group about the New Rhetoric. And right at the beginning of this book, The New Rhetoric, that was written, oh gosh, I don't know the date when it was published, but in the 20th century, post-World War II. The whole thing begins by a distinction between persuasion or argumentation and demonstration. And he tries to do demonstration. He tries to be like, it all follows. And it all follows if you follow him. And I think that's the thing that I think is the weakest in his presentation. 1950s. Yeah, sometime in the 50s. I don't know the year. To me, it made it appear as if Barker was blatantly dodging all of Trent's arguments, whether they were good or not. To put him on, ignoring them. Yeah, I think he's kind of ignoring them. I wonder if he's doing that because they're like really, really powerful arguments. I think it's more likely that he doesn't understand them. And also just that he's just like a very typical kind of debater guy who prepares his speech and he's just like, I'm going to say what I say. And it comes from this analysis, this understanding of debate as just like provocation, as just kind of like the way that we get to a controversial issue is to have two people who have different viewpoints speak. And that the way into the issue is just that anytime two people who have different positions speak, that's how we do it. That's what a debate is. It's a very kind of like watery, weak tea version of debate. So they don't really interact with each other's arguments in those first two speeches. I didn't watch the whole debate, so maybe they do when they're going their back and forth. But my feeling is that he does kind of like ignore the arguments, but at the same time, I don't think that Trent really opens his arguments up for like engagement too much, because they're like, it's like a watertight series of syllogisms, but that's not necessarily the best strategy, because you want people to engage your arguments in a debate that's going to be like about generating a public interest and discourse and thought. You want people to do that, and he's like, it all kind of flows from this analysis of actuality and potentiality and this kinds of metaphysical ideas. So I wasn't impressed with either of them. They seem to have two different styles. I think that in this final question here, definitely Trent Horn comes off a little bit better. But I'm curious what anyone else thinks, or should we look at another thing? I have a little more energy left. I could look at another type of thing, or we could debate. Debate me, bro. That's the name of the stream here on the Rhetoric Prof channel. Because I was thinking about this today, watching a lot of debates, and thinking about how debate is being represented in people's minds as and what people are looking at and how they're thinking about it. And in hearing a number of my students today be like, when there was like a half a class was excited about doing a debate, and then the other half was like, oh no. When we started making arguments, then like everything collapsed because people were like, oh yeah, debate, that's so terrible. And I found that really interesting. So I was trying to think about it today. I thought I'd come on stream and do it. So this has been a good confirmation bias session of me being like, yeah, this is exactly the problem. It's not good. It's not good. I would like to find good debates. If anyone knows where I can find good debates. But I'll look at anything, because they're always instructive. But this one I wouldn't say was good. It wasn't good, but it was okay. Okay, Sabotic is throwing something down. Let's check it out. Oh, I haven't been watching my videos, so I've probably been sinking in my chair. Bad posture. might be more of a discussion. Well, we can look at discussions even something as lowly as a discussion. I can check out. Oh, oh no! What are you doing to me? Oh no! Wait till you see what I've been given here. This will certainly not be.
So the
better. I love the ads.
Both contact lens and the eyewear.
Yeah, I know, Steve. You and I talk about this sometimes, but who knows? Maybe somebody out there has like a whole YouTube playlist filled with great debates.
It seems like
my brother watched it in his class. Let's Debate Posture. Which class did he watch it in? This is Neil deGrasse Tyson's thoughts on transgenderism. This is like a nightmare for me in particular. Some poli-sci class? No. What are they doing? Oh, God. I hate... Okay. I have to be careful what I say. But, I often become very frustrated with my colleagues, my collegial colleagues when they do things like this. Maybe it was great. Maybe they were, like, doing really interesting things. I don't know what they did in your class, but... I think the teacher doesn't like Ben Shapiro. Probably that's all that it was. They're like, let's look at a Ben Shapiro video so I can show you how much I hate Ben Shapiro, which is a very important thing to be educated in, which is your professor's opinions. I don't think that I like Ben Shapiro either, but let's take a look at this.
Militating against the advent of science. One of those areas is the area of transgenderism. The argument that is typically made by gender theorists is that gender is entirely separate from sex. You've seen the argument made that it makes no difference on average if men are stronger than women are, and that if we were to allow transgender women to compete with non-transgender women, then this would somehow not disadvantage biological women. And this seems to me absolutely ascientific, that if we're actually going to have a discussion about gender and sex, that should be based in data, which suggests that mammals are in fact binary in terms of their sex, unless you have intersex birth defects typically, or genetic defects.
I'm happy to opine on this.
No shit.
This only matters because today we segregate nearly all sports by gender.
That is an amazing... I did not see that coming. That is an amazing opinion to have. Thank you, Neil deGrasse Tyson. That's the only reason this matters? Oh, my God. Okay, this is painful, but we'll
otherwise, why do you even give a shit? What someone identifies with. So we live in a free country, and with consenting adults,
freest there
and
is.
People free expression of who and what they are.
Man, on an adult level, I agree with you. I think it does matter what you teach your children.
That's what I'm saying. And so there's the matrix of what you are biologically, how you express yourself, who you choose as a sexual partner. If we actually live in a free country, as we tell ourselves, people's freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all. Nor are they requiring that you behave that way. Okay?
Well,
this is for their own freedoms, because we live in a free country. Now, what is unresolved here is, what do you do with sports? It's unresolved.
That's such an amazing... It makes me... I don't really often experience envy, but I'm a little envious of Neil deGrasse Tyson's, just like the smoothness with which you can go through life, of thinking that this is a question about how to, like, Castor Semenya, and is that's the only reason this matters. Okay. So let's think about some of the things that Ben Shapiro has said so far, though, without just kind of complaining about Neil deGrasse Tyson. Ben Shapiro's view, he's like, look, gender theorists say that there's an absolute separation between gender and sex. And there are many people that make this distinction. It's become a kind of popular distinction, so much that I kind of hear in the classroom, people are like, no, gender and sex are not the same thing. So it's a very popular distinction to make. I think one of the things that we should follow up and be like, well, when people are making that distinction, like, why? What is the distinction that they're making? What do they mean by gender when they distinguish it from sex? Because Ben Shapiro is like, I don't think he conceptualized that there is a distinction. He's just like, they're two words, and you're pulling them apart to try to kind of do something nefarious. But there are a number of ideas. I'm not going to say that I am a master of this particular discourse about the relationship between gender and sex. But I think one of the things that Ben Shapiro will typically go to is chromosomal sexual chromosomes. What sex chromosomes do you have? This is what determines your sex. Even that, I'm not sure is so obvious, because there's he talks about birth. He calls it birth defects when he talks about intersex people. But the idea of intersex or sex chromosomes, there are people that have 2X chromosomes that present as being male to others, not because they've transitioned, just because that's how they present. So there's a huge amount of complexity. It's really not like the relationship between androgens and various kinds of other hormones and someone's chromosomal. It does tend in a certain direction, but it's not universally that way. So it's even quite the question whether sex itself is something that has a binary kind of feature to it. And you can see that he kind of concedes. He's like, unless there's something that's intersex. But the rhetorical move that he makes is to be like, it's binary except for this exception, but this exception is ridiculous. He kind of discounts the exception as not being worthy of consideration, and it's just some kind of weird thing. And this is often where, like, traditionally the idea of the defect or the idea of the abnormal gets kind of classed as the exception that needs not be considered. It's an exception that does not disrupt the conceptual categories that we have. So many people who work on something like intellectual history, well, you see this as a common pattern. Well, they'd be like, well, there are the monsters. And monsters were really what people who had defects were once called. They were things they were portents of what would come, right? They weren't really fully in the category of being human. So they had kind of meaning or significance, but not for the conceptual category that they were excluded from. They didn't disrupt our ideas about what made someone human, and therefore they weren't considered that way. In the same way, Ben Shapiro is kind of taking his taxonomy. He's like, look, this is a binary taxonomy. So any evidence that it's not binary is already excluded, prima facie. That seems like a logical fallacy to me,
and I follow that closely, and I don't see any meaningful solutions to come down off of that. We know that hormones manifest differently in different people, and have just the whole thing with steroids. Steroids are hormones, right? And we rallied against steroids in professional sports because it gives you an undue advantage.
What a weird obsession.
So. I've tried to think of what the future of sports.
A nice debate proposition is steroids should be required in professional sports or whatever, or baseball or something like that. Because the idea that that steroids are banned is a kind of contingent thing that happened pretty recently. So whether it's good or bad, I think that even that's controversial and open to
in the world of a gender spectrum. And it may sports radio you don't specify make this whether it's a male or female sport. You just take measurements of what your hormonal balances are. And so you compete based on your hormones. I mean, this is thought I had. I don't know.
Oh, no. I shouldn't do this in incognito mode, so I keep getting these stupid ads.
I don't know where it's going to land.
The WNBA won't be in business for very long.
It's very weird to think that like what we're watching in sports is people competing on the basis of equal hormonal levels. Like, what a bizarre place to get to as the idea of what's commonsensical. I mean, just so strange. So strange. The idea of like the contest being equal because everyone needs to be equalized in terms of their bodily capacity is an impossibility, but it's also an absurdity. Isn't the kind of differences between bodies partly what athletic contest celebrates? Seems strange to me to try to like equalizing it would be like what is how you respect athletics. That seems weird.
If that's the case.
It would just be you'd have to find some way to compete people against each other if you still care that sports is an interesting activity.
I guess the area where it does come up in a non-sports
also controversial
area.
Yeah, tell me, 'cause I don't know.
So it would be, you talk in your book about the education of children and teaching children about science. And right
Yes.
now, children are being taught about the quote-unquote gender spectrum, which is not scientifically based. That is a theory-based idea.
No, wait, hold on. People express themselves on a spectrum. So you learn that.
That's
I don't
that's a social point, not a scientific point.
It's
meaning we express ourselves
hold on.
based in different languages. Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
So whether the fact that people want to express themselves on a spectrum, on a gender spectrum, whether that fact is something you want to put in a sociology class or in a science class, maybe that remains to be determined.
You know, actually, I'm glad that you sent this to me, because that moment right there is I think a pretty valuable moment of like the bankruptcy of the kind of, I mean, Ben Shapiro and Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think, both participate in this in equal ways, because they're both kind of like the most prominent purveyors of the idea of fact as the source of value and truth and what public discourse should be based on. So I think Ben Shapiro very effectively recognizing that this guy uses the same playbook that I do, that it's all about facts. He's like, well, is this a scientific fact or not? And what Neil deGrasse Tyson is like, well, it could be a sociological fact. And in a weird way here, he has to kind of concede that there are different facts, potentially, in different kinds of discourses or different kinds of realms of study. I don't think Ben Shapiro is going to accept that. But I think that that's a valuable moment to think about.
But it is a real fact about real society.
Well, of course, nobody's denying that people identify how they want to identify.
So
the question is, what is the relationship of that to biology? Meaning that the argument is made that trans women are women, for example. And what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, if people want to say trans women are not biological women, obviously that is the case. But people don't seem to want to say that, although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
But where are you going?
Is woman a biological term? Is woman a term that exists either exclusively or even especially in biology? It seems weird to me. I don't think I've ever heard any biologist that I know, and I do actually know some people who study the philosophy of biology, and I know some people who do biology. You don't refer to a woman ape or a woman cell. So maybe it is a language question after all.
With this, what are you trying to accomplish?
So we're back to motives, right? Just like in the last debate.
Is it science or is it not science? It's people in society.
But this is a perfect example of an area where suddenly it doesn't matter to say things that are just true. Like, why is it bad or wrong to point out?
I have another way to approach this. I care what is objectively true in the world as a scientist. But let me not say even as a scientist. I just simply care what is objectively true. And science happens to be a pretty potent path to invoke, to find out what is true. And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society, if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study. If you want to say it's only sociological,
it's so disappointing,
then it's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care.
Yeah, it's like it has to be social science for it to be valuable. It has to have the word science in it for it to be valuable or to be studyable or to have inquiry into it. And also, like, the inquiry has to like happen by people who are scientists rather than like the people who are experiencing it. Their expression of what they're experiencing doesn't have any value for the inquiry, it seems like here. Pretty depressing, kind of. I mean, what you would expect from these
Here,
two.
who studies it? It's an interesting fact about society. that's worth learning about. To fight someone and say, it's not biological, it's just your this, it's real and it's there.
Well,
because it's real because it manifests.
But it is real because it manifests. But the question of how to classify manifestation is a scientific question, meaning that, for example, there was a woman over at Brown University. She came out with a study that suggested that there was a phenomenon called rapid onset gender dysphoria, in which a member of a particular group would suffer from gender dysphoria, and this person's immediate peer group would suddenly have an onset of gender dysphoria. This paper was so controversial that Brown tried to pull it, and then was forced to reassign it later. You see this sort of treatment.
That's a different question. What you're asking now is, are there some topics that should not be studied scientifically?
Right.
And is there some taboo? Sam Harris speaks a lot about this.
Yes.
And I think the concern is, if you study some topic that's a hot button topic and you bring scientific methods and tools to it.
Thank God for the ads. I never longed for an ad.
Thousands of Massachusetts residents are bringing self-defense into their homes by getting a...
We don't trust, I'm interpreting here, I think we as a society don't trust that people in charge in a free country won't try to legislate something that will constrict people's freedoms in the face of that information. I think that's the fear.
Well, isn't that...
It's a fear.
I mean, and isn't...
Couldn't it also be that scientific research itself is also motivated and part of the historical context that it finds itself in? I think that's the thing that's difficult to imagine for this particular group of people. Because if you assume that things that are not universally true are not true, then science's truth can't be based on its historical context. That science is not a kind of activity or practice. It is a kind of declaration of evidence and truth that is universally applicable at all times and all places. And because of that, you get this kind of really distorted view of science, that it stands apart from the society that it finds itself in. And it clearly doesn't. And so that any kind of reaction to what science says or produces from other people is like seen as anti-scientific or seen as like being a taboo rather than just a reaction. Anytime you put something into discourse, so I mean sometimes this will seem like a very out of left field analogy to people, but this is the kind of stuff that I think about. In the Commedia dell'arte, there was a character named Pantalone. And Pantalone is like presented as, he's presented as like a fake doctor. So he speaks in this, like a lot of the comic force of, there are many versions of his role, but a lot of the comic force of it is that he speaks in like bad Latin mixed with kind of like popular speech. But it's bad enough to the point that someone who has no Latin can recognize that it's bad Latin. It kind of lets you in on the joke. So Pantalone is this kind of guy who going around, he's a quack. I mean, you could say that all of medicine at the time was quackery, right? But this is a guy who's kind of self-consciously that. But his kind of brilliance is to understand how other people who have adopted a view of the medicine of their time as being serious can be persuaded and cajoled by even the appearance of the kind of language associated with that discourse. I think this is the same kind of thing that, like, these are two pantalones. That these are not, I mean, I guess Neil deGrasse Tyson was like a practicing scientist at one point in his life. But just because someone's a practicing scientist, like, do they speak for science with a capital S? Like, did they speak for this monolithic idea of what is going on? I think what it's more like is they kind of know how to speak to people who are very persuaded by the kinds of discourse they associate with science. And they find that powerful. And so if you speak in that way, they're like, oh, okay, well, you must be trustworthy. But there's all of the kind of groundlings who hear that, the ridiculousness of that are just laughing their asses off. Which one are you?
We don't trust our own ability to govern ourselves in the face of what could be some information relative to other. other kinds of information.
Isn't that a bit of a problem?
Yes. Yeah. It's not. It means it's not a free society. It's not a society of free inquiry, which I think you need ultimately. But yeah.
My general take on all of this stuff, from climate change to gender dysphoria to all of these issues, is bring out the science and then let's hash it out. I think that the problem I'm seeing on a lot of sides
is, what is your motivation?
Bring out the science.
Why does that matter?
It matters because you get political power.
That's my favorite polka.
Creating legislation that subtracts freedoms from people who previously were enjoying the same freedoms as you. The history of that exercise
then make a better argument.
Doesn't end well.
But the history of which exercise? Bring out all the science and let's hash it out?
I'm saying
bring out
all the science and the politicians hash
it out.
The history of that exercise is a recipe for disaster if it involves discoveries that put people's freedom as defined in our Constitution at risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing is, I mean, you're Sabatic. I agree with what you're saying, that he's like using this because he's a champion of free speech. Everybody styles themselves as a champion of free speech. I mean, almost all of these public figures do, including Neil deGrasse Tyson. Freedom is just like a topos, or it's one of these like rhetorical topoi that are super, super loaded with people's impressions of what that means. And you don't have to be a philosopher. You don't have to be a legal theorist. You don't have to be, somebody who has like gone to war to know what freedom means. The thing is, do you know what freedom means to somebody else? I don't think that's the part that's a little bit harder, of knowing what freedom means to somebody else. And you can go to the dictionary. You can go to John Stuart Mill. You can go to any kind of authority that you want to cite on freedom, but like the meaning of freedom is an open question. It's not obvious what it means.
Now you're arguing for limitations on areas of particular study.
No, I'm arguing on we need a way to shield, we need a way to protect people's freedoms in the face of whatever gets discovered scientifically.
So
I'll give you.
I agree. I think that's what the Constitution is for, is to guard rights from.
But we're always fighting people who want rights are always fighting others who are saying they don't get the rights from the Constitution. This is a daily challenge on the progressive left. It is a daily challenge, right? Here's an example. I forgot how I ended up getting this phone call. It was some magazine that serves the gay community. And they want, I remember why, because they wanted my opinion on, they wanted my opinion about whether being gay was biological or
Thanks, there's that new study that came out.
Many times. This is probably close to the end anyway. You're not missing much.
And
thanks so much. This was great. Thanks for coming. I'll do it again. I'll let you know.
Which it is.
We'll do it again.
Find out what it is. Fine. But the answer to that question should have no consequence on legislations or laws.
Thanks, Sabatic. See you another time.
For example, suppose it's...
Thanks for giving me this video. Well, I guess I'll close on one thought on what he just said there. He's like, what we find should have no consequence. Good luck. Good luck. I mean, it's very interesting to hear Neil deGrasse Tyson say that, because he's like, his whole shtick is to go around and kind of like prop up, being like, science is the path to freedom, to liberation in all cases. But what if science discovers something that would conflict with people's rights? Not with the truth, but with what is just. Interesting question to dwell upon in this late hour. I'll see you next time on the Rhetoric Prof stream. Thank you for stopping by. This has been a really interesting evening that got better because I stopped trying to have a plan. So let this be a lesson to all of you out there, all of you students, which is don't plan, procrastinate. Things are going to work out. See you next time. Bye.